All right, welcome back, you guys. Like I said, we were just going to take a quick breather, 2 seconds there. We're going to jump back in. I'm going to give you back uh, the what's happening in the courtroom right now, which is nothing. They're at lunch, just so you know. Uh, like I says, they will be right back. And between then and now, I encourage you to grab something to eat, take a breather. I'm going to take my dog out, let him go to the bathroom. After all that kennel cleaning talk, I realize that my little guy probably needs to avoid the kennel situation. So, again, we're here with the Alex Murdaugh murder trial, South Carolina versus Alex Murdaugh, in the homicides of his son and wife, both Paul and Maggie. Did he do it? We don't know. Was it the Colombians? Was it the blood gang from his drug trafficking ring? Who knows, right? We don't. But prosecution's doing their diligence to prove that he did, and I think they're doing a phenomenal job of not doing that. You know, I joked around about during the Rittenhouse trial how the prosecution was the best defense for Kyle Rittenhouse. They were doing a great job of basically giving him all the credibility of innocence that he needed. So the defense team didn't really have to do as much as some might say, but might think. But with this current case, with the lack of physical evidence, i.e., literally like a smoking gun, things of that nature, I get prosecution has a little bit of their work cut out for them. But at the same time, I think they've really talked themselves out of some substantial facts. And by that, I mean they just kept going and going and going and going, and they just didn't let it, enough of it is enough. You've given enough information, move the F on, right? So either way, they will be right back. Between you and I, let's hope they come with something better than what they have come with. And actually, you can send that to the courts as well, because I would love to see them do better. But court is on a lunch break, and they will be back at, we're going to say, 1:15 Central. And I'm going to say possibly. But I'll leave it at 1:15 Central Standard Time. And there we go. So sit tight, you guys. I'll be seeing you here in just a few.
I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks so much for joining us here on Law and Crime. We are taking your questions this hour in the trial of South Carolina versus Alex Murdaugh. He is accused of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul back on June 7th of 2021. Keep those questions coming in to us both on our Twitter feed, in our YouTube chat, and our panel of experts will do their best to answer all of them for you. Joining me this hour, Gigi McKelvey. She is with Law and Crime, and she is in the courtroom there in South Carolina. She's outside the Colleton County Courthouse. She's been there for weeks now. Michael Bryant is a host here with Law and Crime and an attorney. And Dina Dahl is an attorney from California. So, guys, thanks for being here today, as always. Gigi, I'll start with you. What was it like in the courtroom today?
Well, just a little bit of the jurors looking bored at times, and it's just kind of been a little bit of a boring morning. I think not a whole lot of aha moments. We're waiting, still waiting.
Not a lot of aha moments for sure, but it was really some terrible, terrible testimony, I thought, hearing more about Paul Murdaugh's awful gunshot wounds, just the fact that he died in such a horrific, horrific manner. had died by a shotgun blast to the head. It was terrible. So Roger Davis, though, I thought was a really colorful witness, and really enjoyed hearing his talk about the kennels and what those were like, and the family, and whether or not there were guns actually kept down there in the kennel area. So let's get to some of your questions right now. We have a lot of them coming in. I have a lot to go through here, so this is always great, and the best part of the day when we get to hear your questions. Annette Greentree from Facebook asks, if he checked their pulse like he said, wouldn't he have a lot of blood on his shoes? So, Michael Bryant, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, because we've heard testimony that there wasn't any blood on the gym shoes that police seized from Alex Murdaugh on the night of the murders. The Sperry's, the loafers, or what have you, sounds like those are still missing.
Yeah, those are the shoes that I assume, if they were worn by Alex Murdaugh and if he did these murders, those are a mess. We heard this early on in the state's case that he did try to check the pulse of each of the victims. Couldn't do much with Paul's neck. You would check the pulse of the neck or the wrist generally. Paul's neck in that area was such a mess, he really didn't even try. But if there is no blood on his clothing, as the police have investigated it, we're pretty sure those aren't the clothes. If this guy did it, those aren't the clothes. And so it would make perfect sense that there was no blood on those clothes, because we don't know where those clothes are. I'm guessing the Sperry topsiders or some sort of boat shoe, as they've been described. Those haven't been found. We don't know where they are.
Mm-hmm. We do not know where those are. And we still have a third police interview we have yet to hear from SLED. I'm wondering if we are going to hear that third police interview that took place in August of 2021. It's my understanding Alex Murdaugh is confronted at that point about a number of things, and including the shirt he was wearing that night, the clothing he was wearing that day being different in that Snapchat video that Paul took from the clothing he was wearing when the police arrived. Our next question is from Debbie Hall from Facebook. And Dina, this question has to do with the book that Dick Harpootlian kept referring to during the cross-examination of Dr. Reimer this morning, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsies on both Paul and Maggie. Debbie asks, why did they let that defense attorney continue to bring up info from the book about results of contact wound when the coroner had already said it was not contact? He was comparing apples to oranges. Is that the case, Dina?
No, that's a really great question. And I mean, it was within the realm of the subject matter of the direct. And so that's why they were able to cross-examine on this. That's really the only, or not the only, but that's really the basis for whether or not a cross-examination question is appropriate, is if that was subject matter is brought in a direct. And so you can ask whether it was relevant or not, maybe not relevant, but you can ask whether or not it was revealing, but that's why they were able to ask those questions.
And this is another question, Gigi, I'll throw this one to you and get your thoughts on it, because you were actually in the courtroom when this is going on. I'm listening to it and I'm trying to follow where Dick Harpootlian was going. I think I know where he was going, but Lisa Hahn from Facebook asks, was the defense trying to suggest that Paul killed himself? I didn't think that's where Harpootlian was going. That's just what was in that literature, the book that he kept citing was about contact wounds from suicide. So Gigi, what was your take on what he was trying to suggest?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, she said repeatedly this was not a contact wound, but he kept referring back to that book. And I do want to add that a few of the jurors did again today have some issues with the testimony, the pictures mainly. But yeah, I mean, it seemed like he was trying to get somewhere with it. I never got the feeling that he was trying to insinuate Paul had committed suicide. But still, it's just, she repeatedly said it's not a contact wound, but yet he kept going there. I'm surprised there wasn't more objections. Just, I mean, she answered that question 5 times.
Yeah, and then there was this questioning about, did you shave his head to see if the wound on the back of the right side or the side of the right side of the head or whatever was a contact wound? Did it have soot or stippling? I mean, it was a lot to take in. And let's just face facts. The way that Paul Murdaugh died was horrifying. The way anybody dies being murdered is horrifying. But he was standing and his brain was ejected from his body. They took his brain to the autopsy in a bucket. And I hate to be so gruesome, but just think about that. And I think they're trying to say, at least my opinion was that he was trying to say that the entrance wound, the exit wound, what the doctor said was an exit wound, could have been an entrance wound. I'm thinking they're going to call an expert to talk about this. It's horrifying. I feel bad for that jury. Susan Coriel from Twitter, if Alex took Maggie and Paul's pulses, why wasn't he covered in blood? Wouldn't he have had to kneel down by the bodies, Michael Bryant? He didn't have a spot of blood on him anywhere. I think this proves he lied about checking them. Michael, is it possible to check a pulse on someone and not get blood all over yourself?
Well, probably normally I would say yes. In this particular crime scene, it doesn't sound like it. But we haven't seen the crime scene photos to see to what degree there was blood on either of the victim's wrists. And even if you have some blood there, it's not like you're grabbing the wrist and you're gripping it. And I mean, you're barely putting a finger or two on the inner side of the wrist. So I don't think that leads to being covered in blood, even if the victim has blood all over his or her wrist. I just don't see that. And again, it was addressed early on in the prosecution's case to try to minimize the fact that it wasn't that kind of a scene if you're just taking the pulse.
Mm-hmm. And here's another question. This is a good question, Dina, because a lot of people, we've been bouncing back between scientific testimony, financial crimes testimony, lay witness testimony. Jim Roach, one from Twitter, asks, do you think the difference between the strong evidence of the financial crimes and the weaker circumstantial evidence of the murder may backfire, especially with the prosecution putting all that evidence in front of the jury that connects to absolutely no one? Your take, Dina.
Okay, I love this question because I said the exact same thing, I think, in my last appearance, that I think how strong the financial crime evidence is really shows how weak the circumstantial evidence is. I mean, they have proved that financial crime evidence like beyond what they need to. And I think it really shows the lack of it. And it also shows how savvy he is, right? He was able to hide his crimes from these sophisticated lawyers, from the CFO for years. And yet, in order to distract them from that, he does this very unsavvy crime of killing somebody in your home with your shotgun. That seems like the worst way to distract people from another crime. How would that not put attention on him? So I think that it does hurt them to show how smart and conniving he was with his financial crimes, because if he did do these murders, he did it in a really bad way if he wanted to throw off any suspicion on him.
And he would be the number one suspect finding the bodies, number one, and being the spouse of one of the victims of Maggie. So he would be suspect number one all the way. Twitter, a question from Twitter, @whispers2loud asks, will either Murdaugh brother be called to the stand? Gigi, John Marvin, or Randy Murdaugh, do you think that they will indeed be called to the stand?
It's a good question. I think Randy may be on the state's witness list, and I think John Marvin and Buster are on the defense. I guess Randy because of the affiliation with the law firm and being a part of that when that came out. It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, 255 witnesses. I don't even think they've called 60 of those at this point. So I guess it just depends on, I mean, I think maybe defense-wise they might do it. I'm not sure about the state, though, with Randy.
Yeah, and Randy, the clock is ticking on that because the state said they will rest on Wednesday, and we still haven't heard from Randy Murdaugh. He was in court sitting with his brother a couple of times with John Marvin behind Alex Murdaugh, but the state has yet to call him, and it seems like if the state were to call him, it would be about the law firm stuff. Our next question is from Rob Astrav, 7609 from Twitter. Whose DNA was under Maggie's fingernails? I will take that one. Unknown male DNA. We don't know, but it was under her fingernails. The next question comes from @tiredofit10 from Twitter. I think he was trying to infer Paul died execution style, but why the shot to the chest that left him still standing? Michael, I think that was probably what Dick Harpootlian was trying to get at, that somebody walked up to Paul and shot him directly in the head. But why the shot to the chest? What do you make of that?
Well, you can assume, I think, that the first shot if it was to the chest, was to debilitate the guy, and the next one was to make sure he was dead. And the second shot, as the ME described it, was from the shoulder and kind of created this oblong wound, and then a more cylindrical wound right at the neck, which left the face virtually intact, and took off the rest of the skull and the ejection of the brain. And so that sounds less execution style and more just let me get it over with style. It's just not very precise. You want to put a gun to somebody's head, shotgun or otherwise, it's not that difficult to do once you shot them in the chest. So I don't know that the execution style analysis works here. I think really that what Harpootlian was doing, among other things, was continually pounding away at the goriness, the brutality of these murders, because he's going to say there's no way this guy who you see breaking up every moment of this testimony sitting here, he could not have done that to his son. It just wouldn't happen.
Well, and the saddest thing about this to me is that the first wound to the chest, the coroner said yesterday it wouldn't have been fatal. It sounds like with treatment, he could have survived. So it's horrifying to think about. At Beth Litton, from Twitter, asks, so in your opinion, what was the point about Paul's head wound in relation to who did or did not murder Paul? Do you think that was Harpootlian's point as well, Dina, that a dad was not going to do something like this?
It with on cross, or when they were talking to the dog caretaker about how Alec wasn't willing to put down the hunting dog, that somebody else had to do it. And I think those together, I mean, we saw in his opening, in the defense opening, really talking about the brutality of the murders and how this loving husband couldn't commit this. Like, even if you were to think he was going to kill them, wouldn't he have done it in this less gruesome, brutal way? How does a loving person go and do that? And I think that question is kind of an essential question here. And so I think they bring that out when they talk up, in that cross, and when he was talking about the how he was shot and where he was shot. I think that's continuing his theme that he started, the defense attorney started in his opening.
Our next question, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Gigi. I know it's a technical question, so please pardon me, but it's one I've been wondering too. And I wonder, since you're in there listening to all of this, if you have a theory about this. But at Terry M 428-78253 from Twitter asks, how would Paul have been shot by Alex Murdaugh when Paul was shorter than him? Was Alex Murdaugh kneeling when he shot Paul? That's assuming he did shoot Paul. So I've been thinking about that too, because a shotgun is something you really have to brace yourself for when you fire it. This was a 12 gauge shotgun, and it's got a lot of kick, I'm sure. And Alex Murdaugh is a tall guy.
Well, on one hand, they're very used to guns, so maybe it's not uncommon for him to kneel down with a shotgun. But it's something that I've been wanting to hear about too, is to bring an expert on in some capacity to talk about the trajectory of these shots and the angle. I've seen episodes of these forensic shows where they can estimate the height of the shooter based on how the wound went in and things like that. It is a very good question, and that's just something that so far the prosecution hasn't even talked about is the trajectory. How at what angle, at what position is this shooter? But at the same time, we know a couple of the wounds to both of them were close range. And what stands out to me is either with that first shot, Paul did not see the shooter, or he wasn't threatened by the shooter. Those things are what is weighing on my mind at this point too.
Interestingly enough, we've seen maybe a picture or two. There hasn't been much focus on it, but it was in a defense motion where it showed like a mannequin or a dummy standing in the feed room. So it makes me think there had to have been some type of effort to maybe reenact this. I don't know, but I'd like to hear about that. All right, keep your questions coming to us both on Facebook apparently and on Twitter and our YouTube chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. We have to take this quick commercial break for the network, so if you're watching on YouTube, stay with us. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching Law and Crime. We'll be right back. Jeanette Levy, and thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime as we take your questions during the lunch hour in the trial of Alex Murdaugh. He is charged with murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul back on June 7th of 2021 using 2 different firearms, according to the indictment. Keep your questions coming to us both on Twitter and in our YouTube chat. You can even throw some in on Facebook, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. For now, though, we want to take a look at some of the testimony that occurred earlier today, some of it from Roger Davis. He is a man who lives about 1.5 miles from the Moselle property. He's worked for the Murdaugh family for about 4 years, taking care of the kennels where these homicides occurred back on June 7th. He knows the lay of the land out there. He's there twice a day, taking care of the dogs, cleaning the kennels, feeding them, etc. So he knows everything that really goes on in that vicinity. So let's listen to a little bit of what Roger Davis told the jury, and then we'll talk about it.
And a couple things. You've said you've never seen guns left in the feed room, but you certainly seen guns left down in the work shed and
Yes.
and then the what you call side by side, and that's a off-road vehicle that 2 people can sit beside each other.
Yes.
And then I guess they had golf cart down
Yes.
there, and you seen left guns there.
Yes.
And you have seen guns left in their vehicles,
Yes.
unlocked, right?
Unlocked.
And hog hunting, there's really no season for hog hunting, is there?
No.
And a couple of those dogs in that kennel were used for hog hunting.
We had got Paul had got rid of the blue tick, but he kept armadillo, but he never really hunted him anymore after that last time he got hurt.
Right. Now let's just be, when you're hog hunting with dogs, I don't think you can use a gun, can you?
Oh yeah, you can use a gun
Oh, you think, okay. The
unless you're man enough to go in there and catch him by the foot and bring him out.
Well, somewhere along the way, I heard you had to use a knife as opposed to a gun, but I don't. Now, Dale, what's lovey-dovey mean to you?
What did it mean to me?
When you use the phrase lovey-dovey about Alec and Maggie, what does that mean?
It means they love each other.
What in your presence, you described them as being lovey-dovey, didn't you?
Yes.
And tell the jury what you meant by that.
Every time I always see him, I've never seen that man even raise his voice at his wife or kids. Or his wife. I've never seen him even, none of them argue. But he always, anything she wanted or the boys wanted, he would try to get it.
And what was your observation about his relationship with Paul?
They like to hunt and fish together. I mean, they drink beer together.
Okay. And his relationship with Buster?
I didn't see Buster as much, but it was always friendly. I mean, just never seen any harmful way or anything with them.
You remember, Dale, one time, one of the hunting dogs got hung up in one of the kennels,
Yes.
choking to death.
Yes.
And that dog was badly injured, wasn't
It was. It didn't survive.
he? And the decision was made to mercy to put the dog down, wasn't it?
Yes.
Mr. Alec couldn't shoot that dog. He asked you to do it, didn't he?
Yes.
And did you do that?
Yes.
So there was Roger Davis, the man charged with taking care of the dogs on the Moselle property, taking care of the kennels. He was there hours before the homicides occurred, basically saying, answering questions from the defense on cross, saying this was a lovey-dovey relationship between Maggie and Alec as far as he could see. Alec couldn't even take out a dog, euthanize a dog that had been hurt down there at the kennels, according to him, and so asked him to do it. So I guess the implication there, Gigi, is that if Alex Murdaugh couldn't even shoot a dog, how is he going to shoot his wife and son?
Yeah. I mean, look, the thing about the lovey-dovey, number one, we show people what we want them to see. Nobody knows what goes on
Right.
behind closed doors. And maybe Alec watched Where the Red Fern Grows like I did, and it just traumatized you, and you could never think of shooting a dog. But, you know, there's it's just such a difference. I mean, yeah, an animal's one thing, but these are people that he's interacting with. I think it's, you know, I don't know. It's kind of like apples to oranges. Saying he can't shoot a dog, but he can shoot his wife and son. I mean, we just don't know what was really going on behind the scenes with Paul and Maggie both. It might not have been as lovey-dovey as they put on.
And that's absolutely true. We don't know that. We haven't heard any testimony that there was trouble in paradise, but just because people are lovey-dovey in public doesn't mean behind closed doors there isn't more going on. So I do have a lot of questions, though, that relate to Roger Davis's testimony. I've got a ton, and I think this is going to be one of those things where maybe the prosecution connects all of these dots that they think are relevant and important in closing argument. But Michael Bryant, did it pique your interest at all? And this is my question. We'll get to the viewer questions in a minute. About he's saying the hose is not wound up, you know, in the crime scene photos like he would have wound up the yellow hose. We know that the hose was going in the 8:44 p.m. video of cash that Paul took. So why on earth do you think anybody was using the hose? He had just been there at 4:30 in the afternoon and cleaned the kennels.
Yeah, and he was not happy that hose in that crime scene photo was a little, disheveled there. So it begs the question. That's why I think this has been brought up. It's to make people say, well, what the heck was going on? Who would have touched that hose that was less inattentive about it than Mr. Davis and just kind of slung it back on the wall? There was some water in the kennel area. Maybe that's attributed to dogs spilling a water bowl. Maybe not. Was it used to clean up in some way? It raises great questions that at this point are without answers, Anjanette.
Yeah, a lot of questions unanswered. He said Paul might have not been as particular about putting the hose back up. Alex Murdaugh wanted the hose up and out of his way. The dogs are in different kennels than when he left, so there's a lot going on there. Let's get to the viewer questions now. Dina Dahl, this one just came into my email. I love this from Montreal. I love it when we get questions from other countries. This comes from David, and he asks, not being familiar with U.S. law, is there a reason why the prosecution went ahead with the murder trial as opposed to pursuing the financial crimes? Wouldn't Murdaugh be looking at a very lengthy sentence for just the financial scam? It's my understanding the defense wanted a speedy trial, Dina.
Right. Okay. And that was what I was going to say. There really was no, from a prosecutorial point of view, why they necessarily did one or the other, except we have a right to a speedy trial. Criminal. But actually, both of them are criminal if you think about it, the finance and the murder trial. So I think that it was the prosecution that brought the indictment for the murder first before they brought the financial. And that's why we're seeing the murder first.
And a lot of times, and I don't know if you think this is a good idea, Michael, and I'll ask you, Gigi, too. Michael first. You know, a lot of times defense attorneys will kind of do that as a tactic. Yes, their client is entitled to a speedy trial, but it's kind of a, okay, you think you got the goods, put up or shut up. Do you think that's what happened here?
To that, really, if the defense feels strongly about their case and their position, they obviously don't want to cut themselves short. But if they think pressing the prosecution to bring the action sooner than later will benefit the defense, you bet they're going to do that. I'm not sure that's the case here because I don't know what else the prosecution might have developed. You know, we're 4 weeks in, and we're seeing the best of the best, and we're still having the same conversation about could this guy, I don't care who he's hoodwinked or swindled out of money, could this guy kill his wife and his son in the absence of some evidence, any evidence that there was any sort of animosity there? And it's the opposite. We may hear lovey-dovey, and in the context of the guy who takes care of the dogs, might not mean much. He's not there 24/7. But still, where's the negative stuff? Where's they battled all the time. They were always arguing. They never seemed to be able to coexist. I haven't seen anything like that.
Were you surprised that the defense pushed for a speedy trial in the murder case? Just briefly, Gigi.
Gives the state less time to prepare. I mean, look, they're getting evidence from GM on Friday afternoon. So I think it's just one of those things where if you've indicted him, let's see what you've got. Let's just go now. I think that it puts the fire under the state to get this case wrapped up and ready for trial. And maybe we're seeing a little bit of that disorganization where they really could have used some extra time to get their ducks in a row. Seems a little bit scattered at times to me and a lot of people.
It was really surprising to hear GM coming out of the woodwork on Friday. I guess we heard Monday that on Friday they came up and said, hey, upon second look for the search warrant, we do have this data. So here you go. And then we heard it basically brought into evidence today, but we didn't hear anything more about it. So maybe we'll get to that. William Luther from YouTube asks, what did the panelists think the state was trying to get at with the question to the dog caretaker? That was Roger Davis, from whom we just heard. It seems like they are all answered by Alex Murdaugh's story and video of cash. So Dina, what did you think they were getting at with the caretaker questions?
I think they're trying to say that he may have rinsed himself off there after the murders. That to me seems the only reason why a puddle of water would be relevant at all to their case. But again, it bothers me because I want to say, if that is true, if he really did rinse himself off there, then where is all the evidence? I mean, we know now with collection of DNA and blood that the most microscopic samples left over can be collected, and he would have had to pick up the hose. So did they swab the hose? Was there really nothing on the hose? What about the door handles to the kennels? Could they really not find anything on any of those? Did the police just not do that kind of search? Did they not do those kind of collections? So when I'm hearing this emphasis on the fact that it wasn't organized, the hose, and the fact that there was this water puddle, I'm just screaming about, what about all the other evidence? Did they look for it? And if they did look for it, did they just not find any? And if they didn't find any, then I don't care if there was water on the floor, because if he went in there as bloody and gory as he should have, they should have found something somewhere in those kennels.
Well, here's my thing too. And the hose is on in the 8:44 p.m. video. Would that water have still been there at 10:06 or 10:20 or whenever these crime scene photos were taken? That there's still water there. So we don't know exactly what time those photos were taken. We may have to go back and look at that. Melissa Dotson from YouTube, the timeline is very important, yet the state did not spend a lot of time on that evidence. Do you think that was a mistake? Gigi, what do you think of that? I feel like they've talked a little bit, we've heard a lot about timeline, maybe not from all witnesses, but we've heard a lot of discussion, I thought, about the timeline. Do you think there hasn't been enough?
I think there's only so much you can do with that timeline. I mean, really, I think when we got the information about when that car was put in park and when it was taken out of park, as well as the phone records, it kind of gives a really good roundabout of the timeline of that night. Now, this new GM stuff that's going to come in yesterday, both attorneys said that I didn't see where the defense had a problem with it. It doesn't seem like it's going to offer anything that discredits what we already know about that timeline. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest question of the timeline really is just, was confirmed by Miss Shelley, which was that 15 to 20 minutes as opposed to the 30-40. And that was also confirmed with the car being put in park and drive. So I don't know if there's much about the timeline really that we have wiggle room to make something happen in. I think it's pretty solid, minus how long he stayed at mom's.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that both sides were, happy to get this new info, or at least they were saying publicly in court that they believed it helped them, at least. So we'll see once we actually hear about what's in the meat and potatoes of that data. And it sounds like it's a lot of data. Our next question, how does he shoot one and then have time to get the other gun and shoot for the second time? Those are big, somewhat bulky, heavy guns. This is from Lisa Chambers English from Facebook. That's one of the things that's confounded me, Michael Bryant, is the fact that you have to shoot one person, I assume, and then get a second gun and shoot the other. So that seems like a lot to do.
I don't think so.
What are your kind of thoughts on that? Have you kind of worked through that in your mind?
I haven't had the props to play with, but I know a little bit about, the AR rifle, Armalite rifle. It's a light rifle that can be strapped over your back. That's one of the reasons it's used by the military, because it's very light and maneuverable. So you could have that strapped over your back while you're holding a traditional 12-gauge shotgun. Boom, boom, put that aside. You're done with it. Whip the other one from around, the backside of your shoulder. And we know that Maggie was shot effectively, if not fleeing, in the direction facing away from the shooter, shot in the legs, debilitated, and then shot, it sounds like from the ME's examination, shot as she was falling forward perhaps, and it came up from below her left breast and up through and into her head. There was even an abrasion on her stomach before the bullet entered. So that all makes sense. And I think it could be done by one person with two weapons, like I described.
All right. Well, that is Michael Bryant's theory on how this could have been done. Keep your questions coming to us both on Twitter and in our YouTube chat, and we will get to as many as them when we come back. We are taking a quick break. We have to do this for the network. It's a commercial break. If you're watching on YouTube, don't go anywhere. Stay with us. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching Law and Crime. Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks for joining us. And happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I forgot, it's Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody watching, to Gigi, to Michael, and Dina, from me to you. We're taking your questions this hour during the lunch break, so keep them coming to us. We really appreciate all of your questions. They're always great. Nicola MC from YouTube, why is there so little focus on Alec being the Maggie's beneficiary, R.E. Moselle? That's an interesting question, Gigi. I don't know if there's been so little focus on it, but he was obviously anything that she owned, he would inherit, right? As her next of kin, her spouse.
Right. And I'm assuming maybe just with the lawsuit from the boat crash, that might just was something that he wrote off as I'm never gonna be able to get that. I'm not sure. You know how I am with financial stuff, Anjanette. But yeah, so I don't know. I know that the Edisto house as well, I believe, was involved in all that. So he was hiding money for the boat crash. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody else could give insight of whether he could have gotten money should that have sold.
And they were saying, Michael Bryant, that, he was, apparently the guy at the bank was saying he was going to sell Moselle. At least that was in some of the documentation, that he planned to do that to get rid of some of the debt that he was carrying, which was an outrageous amount. Does that matter? He would have probably gotten would have gotten Moselle as her spouse, right? She passes away and he gets everything that she owns.
Well,
but if there's this lawsuit going on, there's maneuvers that can be done, right?
Well, and a will, remember, handles anything but a contract or an inter vivos gift, meaning a living gift. So house is transferred by title, not by will. So if she had a joint tenant on there, or if the right of survivorship will be dictated by the way title was held. Just her, hard to tell. Other beneficiaries might have been identified. I just haven't seen the title documents to know for sure. And so that's an uncertainty as to whether he'd get it or not. And as far as I understand, more recently they sold the property, but it's in escrow because of all of the litigation that's pending. It got $3.9 million for the compound, and the buyers can't really close the deal yet.
Yeah, it seems like the court is involved in all of that, as they should be. There are people who need to be paid. I'm getting the sense that Alec was there at the time of the murders. If true, why wasn't Alex killed also? This is a question from Andrea Coate from Facebook, Dina. She asked too if the killers might it been the guy who faked a kill shot at Alex. That's cousin Eddie. That whole thing is still kind of, we don't know. But what is your thought on that, Dina? If you're going to kill Paul and Maggie, why wouldn't you kill Alec too? Or would you wait for him to leave?
I think that that's a really good question. And I've thought that too, that it seems like it would have been better for the prosecution to argue that he paid somebody to kill them. I think that would kind of have erased the defense saying that he wasn't capable of killing them. It's much easier to pay somebody else to do it, right, than do it yourself. But they obviously didn't have any evidence of that. Otherwise, they would have for sure presented it. But that would have been the theory for why he wouldn't have been killed, was if this was a killed for hire and he was present. Otherwise, really, the argument just is that he just wasn't there at the time. Otherwise, he either did it, he wasn't there, or he paid or was in cahoots with a person. And there doesn't seem to be any evidence that he paid or was in cahoots with somebody. Otherwise, I think they would have shown it.
We definitely, I think, would have seen that from the prosecution if they were able to unearth that evidence, of course. Why is Murdaugh's opioid addiction not being contributed to these murders, or attributed, I think is what they mean. He is a self-admitted addict. Cindy Gaskin-Woods from Facebook asked that question, Gigi. We've heard from some testimony that he was in rehab, but they haven't really gone deep into this alleged opioid addiction. And I say that because Alex Murdaugh says he was in rehab for opioids, as well as his attorneys. But it seems like other people don't buy that he was actually an opioid addict.
Yeah, and that's been the discussion the last couple of days here just amongst us, which is, to the extent that he said I mean, people can definitely be raging addicts and function very normally in society. You never know. But he just didn't have the appearance of somebody who's been addicted to massive amounts of opioids for decades. And I don't know if that's really something you want to touch on, because then you're introducing a whole other element. But look, I mean, motive wise, I think anything would have been better than to deflect from financial crimes, to be honest. I haven't met anybody who says that motive makes sense. So I don't know. They missed the boat on that one, though.
Well, and let's face facts. You know, Alex Murdaugh, everybody can say, well, he was fully functioning, he was this, he was that. Well, it didn't really sound like it. If we literally look beyond the surface, I mean, he's showing up in the afternoon to work. They say he's all frenetic and frantic. His paralegal said that. I mean, was he really functioning? He was, accused of stealing $9 or $10 million. That's not exactly functioning normally. He might have been able to hide the addiction. But functioning normally, yeah, maybe on the surface, maybe he was good at hiding stuff. Addicts are really good at hiding their usage. I want to do a quick round robin before we have to sign Gigi off and take this next break. Guys, there's been some mixed reporting out there over the last 24 hours. Some local stations there in South Carolina saying that Alex Murdaugh's defense team is entertaining putting him on the stand. Maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not. Let's go around the boxes really quick before the break. Do you see Alex Murdaugh at this point taking the stand, Gigi?
Yes and no. I mean, I think any lawyer will tell you don't ever get on the stand. But look, this case is so crazy and there's twists and turns. I wouldn't doubt it. I think there's some things he needs to answer for. So we'll see.
Gigi, I've got to cut you off there. Michael, quickly, yes or no?
Unlikely, but hey, it's a desperation move. He may be desperate.
Dina, yes or no?
Because at this point, he's winning.
Okay, we're signing Gigi off. We'll be right back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. We are in the lunch hour in Alec Murdaugh's double murder trial, and we are taking your questions as we always do. So keep them coming to us in our Twitter feed and on our YouTube chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. For now, we want to show you a little bit of testimony that we heard from earlier today from Dr. Ellen Reimer. She performed the autopsies on both Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. It's graphic, gruesome testimony. It's horrible hearing what happened to both Paul Murdaugh and Maggie Murdaugh, but it's important for the jury to hear. She was on the stand for cross-examination this morning, so let's listen to a little bit of what the doctor told the jury as she was questioned by attorneys for Alex Murdaugh.
And then the head explodes. Have you ever had one of those?
Yes, these are very dynamic, and he still actually had a lot of his head there. Sometimes with the shotgun wound, the entire head is basically, you don't really see very much up above like the teeth. So this was, there was obviously horrible destruction of this skull, but his face was intact, and frequently a contact causes fractures of the face. So, and I don't see any evidence of contact range discharge on the left side of the neck. So it was not my conclusion. That was not my opinion that this is a contact shotgun wound.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this. Your position is the energy by a shotgun blast that went through the arm, through the neck, and then up to the brain still had enough energy. Is it the energy caused by, is it pellets going into the brain?
Yes, well, not just pellets, but there's also fracturing of the base of the skull, which is a bone that holds underneath the skull, and that fracturing with sufficient force can actually push the brain out.
And
So it's a variety of mechanisms that could contribute to the destruction and the loss of brain tissue.
It not only pushes, it fractures the skull. In this case, the brain was brought to you in a separate bag because it ended up laying at his feet. It went up in the air and then plopped down at his feet, correct?
Yes.
Okay, the entire brain.
Most of it, yeah, except for the brain stem.
It exploded out of his head.
Yes.
And the skull was at least almost destroyed around where you say the exit wound is, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so horrible testimony that the jury had to hear regarding Paul Murdaugh's death and the death of Maggie Murdaugh. Obviously talking about how Paul Murdaugh could have been killed. And really, Michael Bryant, we talked about this in the last hour or so. We think that Dick Harpootlian is basically trying to cast some doubt on how the prosecution says Paul was murdered. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, and thanks for playing that again, because I can never hear enough of that. It's just so
It's
gruesome.
horrible, I know.
And just put her job on the list of jobs I never want to have. This is, you're so desensitized to these kinds of things, but you can tell that even this witness is like, this was horrible. And to examine what was left of Paul's body and the brain in a separate bag. I mean, to me, from the defense perspective, what can you be quizzing this woman about to this degree, this doctor, except to inflame the jury and make them think there's no way daddy did this?
Yeah, I don't know. Dina Dahl, I'm wondering, and Bob Mata is joining us this hour, but Dina, I'm wondering, what you believe the defense is getting at here with regard to the autopsy.
He told us in the opening statement that because of its brutality, that actually is evidence that this loving father wouldn't do it. And so we see in many of the witnesses, and this in particular, he keeps on wanting her to talk about how gruesome it is, how really different than maybe typical shootings even are, with the brutality of it. And then his client is sitting there weeping through it. So this is just exactly what the defense wants, to show this kind of very emotional father with this brutal crime, and making it seem like it's just impossible for this man to have done that to his son.
I think they're trying to just cast out too, you guys. I mean, I think that's a big part of it, but I also feel like they're trying to say, this didn't happen the way the state says it did. I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of what I think he's trying to get at, or maybe the shots were in a different order. It was very strange to me. Let's get to one of our questions from the viewers now, coming into us both on Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitter. This one comes from Vivian Albrecht Lear from Facebook. Why didn't the lawyers ask anyone if Paul's head wound that killed him could have occurred when he turned to see who or where the shot came from when he heard or felt the first shot? Bob Murdaugh, what are your thoughts on that? Because the doctor said yesterday that she believed the chest wound was the first wound and that it wouldn't have killed Paul. So obviously he was still standing, she says, when he suffered that gunshot wound to the head.
I think that probably the primary reason is there's a lot of question as to where the entry wound is, like just in general, in terms of the shoulder. And Harpootlian was clearly, and Ken and Jeanette, to go back to what you were just saying before you jumped into this question, I agree. I think with that Harpootlian is basically trying to infer murder-suicide situation. That that was the only thing that I could take from what he was trying to get at, or some kind of situation where, it was an execution, that the gunshot was a contact shot from the top of the skull. As far as why lawyers don't ask questions, it's hard for me to gather, other than the fact that I know that there is some question as to where the entry wound was, because of the size of the wounds, and the fact that the skull was blown out at the top, and it's so gruesome. But Harpootlian doesn't seem to be shying away from it, and we've seen that since, frankly, the opening statement, when he kind of dove right in with it. So I don't have a real answer as to why attorneys don't do a great job during cross, but I did not find Harpootlian's cross-examination to be very compelling, and I thought that Dr. Reimer held up like a champ with respect to that cross-examination.
Yeah, and we got a lot of questions. I want to clear this up on Twitter. We got a lot of questions, or I did, people saying, and I even got some text messages, is he trying to say Paul committed suicide? I think that Dick Harpootlian is smarter than that, because if Paul committed suicide, we'd have a shotgun sitting there. Okay. So let's think about that. That would be likely in his hands or nearby. And so I think it was the fact that book, it was talking about contact wounds. The point he was trying to make was through the literature about contact wounds for people who had died by suicide. So it was a strange point. I thought it was more confusing than anything. He was trying to say possibly the exit wound was the entry wound. Is all I can say to that. Let's get to our next question. Cheryl G from YouTube asks, if it was for the boat wreck, Alec wouldn't have been alive either. Do you agree with that, Michael? If this was all about the boat wreck, would somebody have killed Alex Murdaugh as well, if that was the motivation and somebody related to the boat crash said, I'm taking things into my own hands?
Yeah, I guess if it were, the parents of the victim, maybe that makes some sense if that were the plan. But that's about as weird as the overall motivation that we're being asked to swallow by the prosecution. Just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This was something that was being handled through civil litigation. They were going to get, as best they could be, compensated for the loss of their daughter. Horrible situation, no doubt about it. It just seems like a stretch to suggest that they would then go after the Murdaugh family and, hey, couldn't get Alex, so let's just take care of mom and the guy who was driving. I don't know. I don't buy it.
Yeah, that wouldn't make a lot of sense to me either. D Turner from YouTube asks, what did the guy from GM say? I'll tell you, D, really quickly. Not much. He basically testified to just say, here are the records we found. We found them on Friday and handed them over. So we haven't heard any about the nitty gritty about those records. We know that the one guy from the FBI, the agent from the FBI, had kind of testified, I think, about all of that stuff last week. Everything's kind of running together. Dragon Zone from YouTube asks, is the defense trying to imply that Paul shot himself? We kind of covered that already. I don't think so, but it was hard to tell what they were trying to say. Malia Uma's Heart from YouTube, does anyone think there has been solid evidence to prove him as the shooter. Bob, I'm wondering what you make of that. Do you think that there has been solid evidence shown to say Alex Murdaugh was the shooter here?
No, I don't. I think that there's been a lot of circumstantial evidence where they've been able to show why he would have done it. The fact of the matter is that they're just not going to be able to link him up with actually doing it. I mean, there's breadcrumb trails. You know what I mean? There's certainly smoke there, but there certainly has not been any kind of evidence that has been entered in that definitively points out that he's the guy. You know, which is why we're experiencing the joy of having to go through 2 trials in 1 trial with financial stuff. I mean, that their motive is so important because that's stronger evidence than they have with respect to what they have to who actually made, you know, who actually killed both Paul and Maggie. So, you know, I mean, they're having to kind of craft their way through this thing just because it's one of those things where there's no direct evidence. It's all circumstantial. So I don't know. I don't know how this financial thing is playing out. You know, I just keep thinking about the fact that the jury doesn't have notebooks to take notes. And we're into the 4th week of trial with witness after witness after witness. And like, I've been doing this for 20 years, Anjanette, and I have no idea what Harpootlian's entire purpose was with the pathologist. You know what I mean? Imagine what a jury's thinking. I mean, you always have to, we don't matter. What we say doesn't matter. With the 12 in the box, plus, you know, the alternatives, that's who matters. And it seems awful clunky to me.
I think they're going for the 2-shooter theme here. I mean, that's kind of what they suggested early on. But yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. It was a little confusing with the cross. I really had to kind of work my mind through it myself. At T-Body Fitness 1 from Twitter, did the medical examiner specifically say the time of death? I'll handle that one quickly. No, they did not. I think they're relying on the cell phone records for that. At K-Fount from Twitter asks, defense kept mentioning the lack of reviewing crime scene photos. What was the overall defense strategy with the line of questioning with the pathologist? What were your thoughts on that, Dina?
I think that they were trying. Okay, here's the thing: is I think the defense has a lot of leeway. They have some great questioning here regarding the police and all of their collection and analysis, because if the prosecution loses this case, it's, I think, going to be because of the lack of what the police didn't do. Like that night, why didn't they go inside the house and start swabbing everything, right? And it rained and they leave and all of the things get delayed. They end up searching, you know, even when they go and find that jacket, you know, it's days later. I think that there is so much room for the defense because of the lack of really what the police did in the collection. It bothers me a lot that they haven't shown any evidence of what was inside that home, because if he did commit these murders, you know, he would have had to clean up, you know, there's things on door handles all over the place. And I haven't heard any evidence, because you can even show the existence of like bleach or cleaners if there wasn't blood. And the lack of all of that, because they didn't do it, I think they didn't consider him a suspect as early as they should have. In hindsight, they didn't do as thorough of an investigation as early. And I think that hurts them here.
You make some really good points there. And just the fact that the search warrant wasn't executed, I mean, I still am a little bit shocked by that. You know, this is a double homicide, for goodness sakes. Let's get to some more of our questions. Jackie Lowe from YouTube asks, if ones find it hard to believe money was the motive and distraction, could it be possible he did it in fear of sparing them embarrassment of his debt and being fired that day? That's interesting, Michael. I mean, do you think that's actually, do you think that that's plausible that he was, I mean, how do you explain Buster still being alive then?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty extreme, but I'll tell you what that does, Anjanette. It tells us how desperate people are to find a believable motive. I have to say, I mean, I've been involved in 1 or 2 trials, whether in the courtroom, in the field, on the desk. This is the worst circumstantial case I've ever seen. You know, normally we see some direct evidence, some DNA, something, or a great motive. And we got nothing here. We have neither. So, in discounting that theory, it's as bad as the current prosecution theory.
All right, good points, Michael. Jenny GA from YouTube. Anyone thinking maybe a hung jury? Bob, what do you think about that?
That's a distinct possibility, frankly. I mean, there's this feeling, and it goes hand in hand with everything that's going on with Murdaugh and who he is down there and the family and the legacy of them. I mean, he's sitting in the courtroom where his grandfather's, portrait is sitting in there. There's this feeling that this is a rigged game anyway. But going back to exactly what Michael just said, it's a weak case. And that's the brass tacks is it's a weak case. I mean, when you look at the cumulatively what they have, it's not much. I mean, you're having to say, okay, well, he was there on the video. We can hear his voice. And, we've built a timeline to when we think that the murders happened. But to go back to the point that they didn't process the scene properly is going to be huge in terms of in that jury box or in that deliberation room, because they just screwed up the entire investigation from the get. And they've put forth, the state has put forth an incredibly confusing narrative. And the way that they put the case forward, intertwining the financials in order to try to establish a motive, it's just going to confuse the jury. I really believe that. And we still have the entire defense and all their witnesses to go. So I think that a hung jury is a distinct possibility. The real question is, would they try him again?
Oh, I mean, the prosecution, I think they think their case is a strong case. I mean, I would think they would have to try this again, say there is a hung jury. We're nearing the ends of the state's case, so we have to be really open to the possibilities here with the verdict. Heather Bunner from YouTube, you guys, let's go around the squares, a quick round robin question, and let's make our answers quick here. What was he doing with all of his money? Dina, what do you think he was doing with the money?
He might have just been living on it. I mean, people tend to live above their means, and he just wasn't making enough for all of their kind of properties and vacations and so forth.
Yeah, and there was some testimony too that maybe he had some real estate deals that went south with some islands and off the coast of South Carolina. Michael, briefly, what do you think he was doing with all the cash?
Numbered accounts. Check your offshore numbered accounts. That's what I think. It's easy to hide money if you want to.
I'm waiting for that shoe to drop. Bob, what do you think he was doing with all the money?
Somewhere, and gambling, maybe.
Interesting, gambling. All right, we'll see what we find out, right? Thanks, guys. This ends our lunch Q&A session. I'm going to send it back over to Michael Bryant after this commercial break, so stay with us. Testimony is set to resume any minute now in the state of South Carolina versus Alex Murdaugh. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching Law and Crime. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Michael Bryant here. Hope you had a chance to join us for the Q&A with Anjanette Levy, where I sit there the entire time like this. Please don't ask me something I don't know. Anyway, we're going to continue our coverage. I'm looking at the clock there on the courthouse wall, which means the cameras are trained away from the courtroom itself. And as soon as they jiggle and come to life, we'll know that the activities are about to begin again, and we will jump back in there. In the meantime, from this morning, again, we've had a myriad of testimony today from medical examiner to dog handler to accountant. Earlier today was Dr. Reimer, and she talked at one point about her examination of the stomach contents of both Paul and Maggie. Let's watch this. It's interesting.
The lack of a lot of blood, though, in the abdomen telling you anything about how rapidly these all occurred together?
Yeah, so if the wound stopped there to the abdomen and somebody walked away, you know, she would have had more bleeding out of those tissues into the abdominal cavity.
In both Maggie and Paul, did you make any observations about their stomach contents?
Yes, so part of the autopsy, I'm not just looking at the wounds, I'm examining all of the internal organs. And this is how I knew it went through the pancreas and the kidney, because remember, I'm not just looking outside of the body. I have to do everything, look at all of the internal organs and dissect each one. And when examining the stomach, I will document the contents of the stomach, and they each had a lot of recently digested food fragments. So, you know, they had a full stomach of food.
Were those stomach contents consistent with one another?
Yeah, they looked identical to each other. They were kind of gray tan, you know, couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it may have included meat. I didn't see any corn or, you know, green beans or anything like that. But whatever it was, they were identical to each other. And I believe she had 600 mLs, which is like it's 450 mLs is a pound, so it's like almost 1.5 pounds of food, and he had 500 mLs, which is a little bit more than a pound. But they looked similar, like they may have shared a meal together.
You testified that there was no defensive wounds on Paul. Did you observe any defensive wounds on Maggie?
No, nothing that would indicate any kind of a defensive wound.
Did you observe any damage to her fingernails or anything that indicated that she had been in a fight with her attacker?
No, that's also part of the autopsy. I'm, in addition to collecting clippings from the fingernails, I look carefully to see sometimes there's a fingernail broken, sometimes there's obvious tissue or blood underneath fingernails, and she didn't have any evidence of, you know, material visually evident underneath her fingernails.
What about her toxicology? Did she have anything in her system? Any drugs or alcohol?
She had caffeine only, the same as Paul, and no alcohol or other drugs other than caffeine.
And so what do we learn from that? They had basically the same food, apparently, Paul and Maggie. Bob Murdaugh is still here with me. He's a criminal defense attorney, host of the Defense Diaries. Hey, Bob, does it bother you that there was no established time of death, or at least no estimate? Does that bother you?
Yes, it does. You know, in a case like this where it's all circumstantial and timing is everything, you know, the state's gone to great lengths to establish where Murdaugh was at certain times, and us really not.
Be seated.
Okay, our witness. You may bring the jury.
jury is present, sir.
Okay, very good. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Burney.
Afternoon, Mr. Griffin.
I want to be sure we understand what you've done. You did analysis of various bank accounts, seeing deposits in and money out. Is that correct?
So for the tracing, it was specifically the alleged stolen funds. I would just trace them out as they went through the bank accounts using that first in, first out method.
I mean, did you analyze any accounts that were stolen, what you contend to be stolen funds were not deposited into?
There's probably one or two accounts, maybe stolen money didn't hit, but any account under Alex Murdaugh's name at Palmetto State Bank and Bank of America, those were the primary two accounts.
But I mean, you're aware that he earned income as a practicing attorney?
Yes, yes.
And did you segregate that monthly income from?
Yes. So what I would do is prior to these funds going into those accounts, using that first in, first out method, I would completely deplete whatever income or deposit was in that account prior to, so we could separate each check out.
And you, in your testimony here today, you for the most part, limited your analysis to the $792,000 of the Ferris fee. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the only tracing we went over today.
Okay, and then at the end, you testified about essentially Mr. Murdaugh's. I guess it was a analysis of liabilities versus assets,
right?
About whether he had enough to pay A, B, and C.
Right. So what I did for the date of June 7th, the accounts we had, I looked at balances in addition to outstanding loans. So that's how I was able to determine that.
And that was just purely balances in financial accounts. Is that right?
That's correct.
And did that include any analysis of his 401k or retirement account?
No, in the balance sheet I had no, because those were in retirement accounts.
Okay.
So obviously, you have tax implications and penalties and fees associated with those.
And did that analysis include the value of any real estate holdings?
So I was just looking at outstanding, what he owed the bank.
Did that?
I didn't have up to date June 7th, 2021 appraisals for every land he owned.
Sure. And I think we all understood your answer, but your answer is no, it did not include an analysis of any equity in real estate holdings. Is that correct?
No, because I would not be able to determine that to the date.
And your analysis also did not include any interest he may have in real estate partnerships, correct?
Such as Redbeard and Zero United.
Well, let's start there. Redbeard and Zero United.
So I just had the loan statements and the outstanding principal on that. And as we know, they were charged off, I believe, in 2012, and interest was accruing. But this is just a principal balance that I was looking at.
Right, but you didn't look to see what the value of Redbeard was and the value of United was.
No, I had no idea what they would have been in June 7th, 2021.
And were you aware that he was had equity interest in a real estate partnership that owned the PMPED law firm building in Hampton?
I became aware when I saw he was paid out of that account at the end in October, I believe. And then I would see occasionally, I called them rent checks. I think every month or so he would get a few thousand from that ownership.
But in your testimony of sort of a snapshot on June 7th, you didn't take into account the value of his interest in the PMPED law firm building, did you?
So I was looking at liquid assets. So would he have the ability that day to pay those amounts?
Okay. All right. And I take it then you also didn't take into account his ability to raise capital through borrowing money from Palmetto State Bank if he needed to.
So I was only looking at outstanding loans, so I can't comment whether or not he could. We know after the fact he got a loan from the bank, but at that time I wouldn't know what he's eligible for or not eligible for. He wanted to take out an additional loan.
Well, we know before the fact that he had never been turned down for a loan at Palmetto State Bank, correct?
To my knowledge, no.
Right. And we know before the fact that he had paid Palmetto State Bank in over $4 million in interest payments. Don't we know that?
I've not calculated that myself, but if that's what you're representing.
Okay. Well, we know before the fact that the chairman of the board of Palmetto State Bank's position was, if Alex Murdaugh wants a loan from the bank, we'll make it happen. You're aware of that, aren't you?
That's my understanding.
So there was no, and just to be clear, you weren't telling the jury that on June 7th, Mr. Murdaugh's financial freight train was about to go off to the ravine. That's not what you were telling this jury, is it?
I was just looking at the account balances, outstanding loans, the fact that money had to be borrowed to pay back the Chris Wilson fees.
And he borrowed money from his partner, Johnny Parker. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you know before the fact that Mr. Parker frequently loaned money to other partners in the firm because the cash flow in their business was, not great until the end of the year.
I know Johnny Parker loaned Alex money. I'm not sure about the other partners, but you are correct. He did loan him money.
Now, in your analysis of the $792,000, you testified that that a large percent of the money went to associates, and then the rest went to pay credit card bills, right?
Generally speaking, without getting into a granular level.
Sure. Well, can you generally tell me approximately how much money of the $792,000 was sent to Curtis Eddie Smith?
From my tracing, approximately $500,000.
Of the 792?
Of the 792, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. 1 second, Your Honor.
You direct.
Mr. Bernie, you indicated that you were looking at liquid assets on June 7th, 2021. Is that correct?
That is.
Did I understand your testimony a moment ago correctly that that's what you were looking at?
Yes.
Mr. Bernie, do you own a home?
I do.
Right. So you've gone through the process of purchasing land before, is that correct?
A couple of times, yes, sir.
A couple of times. When you were buying, or let me rephrase my question here, did you ever sell any real estate?
I have once.
Was it an instant process, or did it take some time?
It took months.
Months?
From listing to closing, yes.
So did you get the money for your real estate right when you sold it, or did it take all the way to closing to get that money?
Took all the way to closing.
Mr. Murdaugh needed money from his real estate interests through sell. Would that have taken some time?
I imagine, yes.
Did I hear you correctly a moment ago in your testimony or acknowledge in your testimony the possibility that Mr. Murdaugh paid over $4 million in interest to Palmetto State Bank on various loans.
That's what Mr. Griffin represented. I had not done the calculations myself.
As you indicated a moment ago, what was your aim again in tracing these funds?
Looking at their ultimate dispositions, where the money went to.
Did you start with particular instruments and then go from there?
I did.
And in analyzing where the funds from those instruments went, did a portion of those instruments go to loan payments?
Yes.
At Palmetto State Bank?
Yes. Loan payments at Palmetto State Bank and to pay back loans from other individuals.
And did a significant portion of those funds go towards paying that $4+ million in interest to Palmetto State Bank?
Yes.
And did that represent a significant portion of where the stolen funds were ultimately disposed?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Thank you.
Your next witness.
All right, the state calls Marion Proctor. Marion Proctor.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? All right, you go this man. Sit right up here. State your full name for the record, spell your last name, and then move the microphone where they can hear you. Okay?
I'm Marion Proctor, Proctor.
Good afternoon, Ms. Proctor.
Hi.
Go ahead and tell the jury, do you have any relationship to Maggie and Paul?
I am Maggie's sister, and Paul is my nephew.
Can you pull that mic just a little bit closer or slide your chair up just a little bit so you don't have to lean forward?
Okay.
And is that a fresh bottle of water there?
It is.
Oh, it is? That's your water?
Yes.
Go ahead and, if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself, just where you grew up and just a little bit about yourself so they get to know you just a little bit, please.
Okay. I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. Maggie and I did. She was my only sibling with two parents. And we both went to college, both married, both lived in South Carolina. We've been here ever since. I'm married. I have 3 daughters. And we live in the Charleston area.
Where did Maggie go to college?
South Carolina.
Did she go somewhere else and then transfer to South Carolina?
She did.
How far apart are you and Maggie?
5 years.
And your parents, what are their names?
Terry and Kennedy.
And do y'all have any other siblings, or was it just you and Maggie?
It's just Maggie and me.
Growing up, being 7 years apart as younger folks, was that a bit of an age difference as y'all grew up?
It was. For children, that's a lot. So, I was in college. She was in high school. So we weren't super close when we were children, but later on, as our lives became more similar, we became very close.
And how long ago do you think that relationship grew very close?
When the children were little, we did a lot together. It was easy. As they got older with, their commitment, sports and things like that, it was mostly holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. And then when we both became empty nesters, we were having a really good time.
Y'all talk almost every day?
Almost every day.
Tell the jury a little bit about Maggie. How would you describe her as somebody, just so they can get an idea of who she was?
Maggie was sweet, She was kind of a free spirit. She was always up for anything that was going on. She loved her family. She loved her boys. Buster and Paul were her world. She loved my parents. We, joked how we would grow old together and take care of them. And she was just a really, really good person.
Was Maggie a tomboy at all, or was she more of a girl's girl?
No, she was definitely a girl's girl, but she made the best of having two boys. She was right in there fishing, hunting. She didn't grow up doing that. We used to laugh that she'd get in the deer stand with her Southern Living magazine, and the boys would tell her she was making too much noise turning the pages. And then, fishing, she loved going out on the boat. She loved being at the beach. She loved going to the islands. I don't know that she really fished that much, but she just wanted to do what they were doing. She wanted to spend time with them.
What about the Gamecocks?
She was a big Gamecock fan.
Are you a Gamecock fan?
I'm a big Clemson fan.
Y'all still managed to get along, though.
We got along great. We did. And we were together a lot on those Clemson Carolina days. And we would have a big time.
Being kind of a girl's girl, did she like spending time with you and your daughters and getting a chance to do those sorts of things?
She loved it. She and my girls loved their Aunt Maggie. She always, said that she was their favorite aunt. And she just, loved catching up on all the latest makeup and, hair trends and shoes. And she just loved doing girl stuff with us.
Did Maggie work over the years, or was she focused on taking care of the boys and raising them?
She was mostly a stay-at-home mom. She had a little shop in Hampton for a while. She and Miss Libby did that together. So that was fun. She was real involved with the boys' schools, all their sporting events. I don't think she probably ever missed one. But she was mostly a stay-at-home mom.
What about Paul? Did you get to know him, obviously, as your nephew?
Yes.
Tell the jury just a little bit about Paul and what he was like.
Paul was a sweet, sweet boy, misrepresented in the media. He had such a kind side to him. He was always wanting to help. Aunt Marion, does Uncle Bart need some wood? He'd bring us a load of wood. He was a kind soul, and I loved him a lot.
Was Maggie very involved in the family finances, to your knowledge?
Not at all.
Explain to the jury a little bit, if you would.
They had a comfortable life. Maggie was happy. It wasn't a lavish life, but it was a comfortable life. And, money just, it was never an issue for her that she knew about.
That she knew about?
Right.
I think you said you don't think Maggie ever balanced a checkbook because finances wasn't.
She didn't. So I was the sister who balanced it to the penny and went crazy if I made a mistake in my checkbook. Maggie's was in the floor of her car with all of her bills thrown all over it. And she didn't. Organization was not her best skill.
Mr. Randolph, Paul's grandfather, did you know him?
I did.
And then his spouse was who?
Miss Libby.
Towards the end of Maggie and Paul's life, and tell the jury just a little bit about Miss Libby's health.
Miss Libby had Alzheimer's, and wasn't too bad at first, but she's been declining for years. And it's real bad now. I think she stays in bed all day. She doesn't recognize her family. And she has to be helped to do everything. She can't feed herself or go to the bathroom or do anything.
Back in June of 2021, was her condition similar in that regard?
Yes.
Back in June of 2021, was Mr. Randolph suffering any health issues?
Mr. Randolph was really sick. He had lots of different things wrong with him. And I think that his days were coming close to an end.
In the days leading up to Paul and Maggie's death, had the family received some not encouraging news about Mr. Randolph's prognosis?
Correct. I think that they felt like everything had been done for him that could be done. And I'm not sure Mr. Randolph wanted anything else done to him either. It had been a long road for him.
Backing up a little bit, the family, Alec and Maggie's family, properties, did they have a house in Hampton at one time?
They did. They built that house.
And did they have a beach house?
They did.
And where was that?
At a stone.
And when did they get the beach house roughly? Do you recall?
Oh, gosh. I really don't know. They've had it for a long time, 15. I really don't know. I'm sorry.
And what about Moselle? They had that property as well?
Yes, Moselle was their most recent property. And it was kind of a hunting plantation type place. Great setup for hunting everything, and lots of beds for Alec to have men come out and have hunts, and not Maggie's favorite place to be, but the boys loved it.
Sure. And in the summertime, where did Maggie typically prefer to be? At a stow? Or?
She loved the beach, yes.
Are you familiar with what people refer to as the boat crash?
I am.
And to your general recollection, that happened around February of 2019?
Correct.
After the boat crash, did the family, and particularly Maggie, feel like what she felt is some sort of backlash in the community or some sort of negative reaction that bothered her?
She did. That was a devastating blow for their family. It was a horrible accident, but it was an accident. And Maggie felt like the Hampton community had turned against her. And Paul was being mistreated. People would say mean things to him, call him names. Social media, inappropriate things were said to him. Inappropriate things were said to him when he went back to school. And it was very hard on the family. It was very stressful.
Is that also part of the reason that Maggie preferred staying in Edisto?
I think so, yes.
During this time period, did Maggie start looking for a house somewhere else?
She did. They sold their Hampton house. She was looking in the Hilton Head, Bluffton area for something. She had been looking in that area for a while.
Okay. Did she find anything she liked?
She did. She found one house that she just loved, and she called me and my parents to come down and take a look at it. And I believe Alec was there too. And she really thought that they might make an offer on that house, but in the end, they did not. I think Alec advised her that the timing was just not right with the boat. case going on.
What is the case going on? So we move closer to June 7th of 2021. I believe you testified that the family had received some bad prognosis on Mr. Randolph. Is that correct?
Yes. Maggie called me that day and said she was at Edisto. She had some men working on the house, and Mr. Randolph was not doing well at all. And Alec really wanted her to come home that night. She hadn't planned on it, but that he needed her to come home, and Paul was going to be there too. And I said, well, Maggie, I said, Alec and his dad are super close, and that's probably what you should do. Go be with him if he needs you.
She said that Alec wanted her to come home that night?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of Maggie's intent or what they were going to do that night?
I was under the impression they were going over to Alameda to visit his parents.
And that's why Alec wanted Maggie to come home?
Correct.
And that was from your conversation with her?
Yes.
She called you to let you know that that's what Alec had called her about?
Yes.
You said she was having some work done at Edisto on June 7th?
Yes, just maintenance work, getting it ready for the summer.
You encouraged her to go to Mozo?
I did.
Was that the last time you talked to her?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. You remember about what time of day that was?
I think it was around 4:00 in the afternoon. I think Maggie loved to call me when she was driving. She was always driving from, Moselle to Edisto to Charleston. And I think it was around 4 that afternoon.
What was the rest of your day like? Just a normal day?
Just a normal day.
Did you go to bed that evening?
Actually, we were not in bed. We were watching a movie. It was just Bart and me at home that night.
Bart, your husband? Tell me how you found out.
John, I didn't even realize this was going on. We were watching a movie, and Bart had gotten up to, I thought, go into the kitchen, and he had a text from John Marvin saying that a text from Randy saying that there had been a tragedy, and could Bart please call him on his cell phone? He had called on Alec's cell phone, but wanted Bart to call him back on his cell phone.
So what happened?
So Bart went outside and called him. So I still didn't know anything was going on, and told him that Maggie and Paul had been shot. They were dead.
What was your reaction?
I just couldn't believe it. I didn't think it was true. I said, there has to be a mistake. I said, there's got to be some explanation. It just can't be them.
What did y'all do after that?
We gathered up our things, and we went to tell my parents. And they live in Somerville. My mom had just had knee replacement surgery. So when we got to Somerville, I called and I said, Mom, we're on the way, and we've got some bad news to share, but I want to be with you. And so she was sitting in her recliner chair with her leg all bundled up, and So we got there and both of my parents were there. And I think my mom went into shock. She couldn't be still, and she just kept making these noises. And it was just the worst.
Did you go to Moselle at any point?
We pretty much stayed with my parents all night. We went back home, showered, and then we all went to Moselle the next morning.
Over the next few days, were y'all staying back in Somerville and going to Moselle, or what were you and your parents doing in Bart?
So we had family coming in from Kentucky, and some of them were staying with me, some of them were staying with my parents, but we were in Moselle every day. We were planning the funeral, we were in Moselle every day after that until the funeral.
Did that shock of finding out last for a while?
I'm sorry?
Did that shock of finding out last for a while?
It's still hard to face.
When you got to Moselle, did you see Alex, the defendant?
I did.
Did y'all hug?
We did.
Cry?
We did.
Over the course of the next couple of days, or in the aftermath, as the shock was wearing off just a little bit, did you have any conversation with Alec about what had happened?
I didn't talk to Alec a lot. Alec was just really busy, and the whole town was coming to see him, and he was very, very, very torn up. I did at one point ask him if Maggie had suffered, and he assured me that she did not. Now, I don't know that I think that's true. And I asked if Paul had suffered, and he said no. And then later I asked him, I said, Alec, do you have any idea who's done this? I said, we have got to find out who could do this. And he said that he did not know who it was, but he felt like whoever did it had thought about it for a really long time.
Whoever had done it had thought about it for a really long time. Did that strike you as odd?
I just didn't know what that meant.
Were you ever privy or have any discussion with anything Alex said about whether or not he went to the kennels that night?
I personally did not talk to him about that, but he told my mom that he had dinner with Maggie and Paul, and then he took a nap, which he did. That was kind of a routine. He would lay down on the sofa at night after work and take a nap.
But he said he never went to the kennel.
Correct.
After your conversation with Maggie, your last conversation with her, did it strike you as odd that she didn't go to the kennels or go to Alameda with Alec?
Yes,
And why is that?
because that's the whole reason she went home that night.
Did you think from your conversation with Maggie that she was planning to see Mr. Randolph too?
I thought so. I didn't realize that Mr. Randolph wasn't there at the time.
That was a surprise to you? In the days and weeks following Maggie and Paul's murder, did Alec ever say anything about the boat case?
we would talk about the boat case. And he was very intent on clearing Paul's name.
What did he say?
He said that his number one goal was clearing Paul's name. And I thought that was so strange because my number one goal was to find out who killed my sister and Paul.
But that wasn't Alex's concern, main concern?
I know he must have wanted that too, but it just, I don't know how he could have thought about anything else.
But he talked about the boat case. You ever act scared or afraid that the real killers were out there somewhere or anything like that, or was he concerned with the boat case?
We were afraid. We didn't know what was going on. My family was scared. I was scared for Alec and Buster. I felt like they needed protection. I think everybody was afraid. And Alec didn't seem to be afraid.
Did he also talk about getting Buster back into law school
Yes.
after the murders? Maggie loved those dogs, didn't she?
She did.
She liked going down there and playing with them?
She did.
Would she tend to walk down there, or would she take another way to get down?
If she was dieting, she'd walk. Sometimes she'd ride her bicycle, and she'd take her car. She'd go, just whatever she felt like. Take her car, take one of the golf cart things.
She wasn't a hunter, though, was she?
No.
What'd she think about those AR-style guns that the boys said?
She seemed to be fine with those. I remember when she wanted to give them those for Christmas, and I just growing up with girls and not in the hunting world, I said, Maggie, why would you give those boys those guns? And she said they love to shoot hogs, and which I understood that the hogs were tearing up their property, but it just scared me that that the boys would have such a dangerous weapon. But I know nothing about guns, so.
One second, bro. Thank you for testifying. Please answer any questions the defense may have.
Mr. Griffin.
Hey. I'm sorry, this is hard for me too. Maggie was a very special person, wasn't she?
She was.
And she and Alec had a very special relationship, didn't
They did.
And they had a very special family, did they not?
They did.
And they loved to do things together as a family, didn't they?
They did.
And it just wasn't Alec and Maggie and Paul and Buster, but your parents were part of their family, right?
Yes.
And I doubt you've heard all the testimony here in court, but a lot of Paul's friends referred to your dad as Papa T. Is that what people refer to him as?
Yes.
And your mother as Grandma.
Yes.
And it sort of seemed like Paul and Buster's friends were part of your parents' extended family. Is that right?
Yes.
And you and your husband and Bart and your children, y'all would all vacation together with, not necessarily with Buster and Paul's friends, but with Maggie and Alec and Paul and Buster, and y'all did things as a family a lot. Did you
We
not?
did.
And Alec was really close to your parents, wasn't he?
Yes.
And he considered your dad as one of his best friends, I believe.
He was very kind to my dad.
Right. And y'all would vacation. I think you and your husband have a house in the Keys. You would vacation there, right?
Correct.
And y'all would do a lot together. You place up in off Lake Kiowee.
Correct.
And you said Maggie was a girl, but she took to the boys and learned to be a mother of two rambunctious sons, right?
She did.
And you said earlier that about sporting events that Maggie never missed any of Paul and Buster's sporting events. Is that right?
Correct.
And Alec was there right by Maggie at every sporting event, wasn't he?
Coaching.
Coaching most of the time, right? The weeks leading up to the horrific day of June the 7th, you had a family get together up at Kiowee,
We did.
and your daughter was you're having a baby shower for your daughter. Right?
Right.
You're about to be a grandmother for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah. And where was it?
When was it?
Where?
Where?
Yeah.
My daughter lives in Greenville.
Okay. And and it was a weekend, I think, of May 21st.
I think it was the weekend before Memorial Day weekend.
Right. And I'm going to show you a photo and see if you recognize this photo. And it's Defendant's Exhibit 122.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
I took that picture.
You took that picture.
I did.
Your Honor, we would introduce Defendant's 122 in evidence this time.
No objection, Your Honor.
Can you pull up 122, Doug? I'm not sure, Marion, if the jury has actually seen a picture of Maggie in this trial. She's obviously the only female here in this photo.
Mhm.
And y'all favor each other greatly, right?
We do.
And this was a weekend just a couple of, I mean, you said the weekend before Memorial Day, right? And that's Buster on the left,
Yes,
and that's Paul,
right,
and then Maggie and Alex, right?
correct.
Okay. Thank you. You can take that down. Did you see Maggie again after being with her up in above Greenville?
I did not.
So that was the last time you were together with her?
Mhm. She, they were at Edisto for Memorial Day, and then the next weekend was my birthday, and we were back in the upstate. And then I got the call on Monday.
And you understand, the weekend after Memorial Day, Alec and Maggie went to Columbia for a super regional baseball game with Buster and his girlfriend, Brooklyn.
Right.
You were aware of that?
I am.
And you mentioned that Maggie was a big Carolina fan and Alec was a big Carolina fan, right?
They both graduated from there.
And they went to a lot of the Carolina sporting events as a couple?
Yes.
Right. And leading up to June 7th, let me back up. I know we've talked about this, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but Maggie did a lot for Alex's mom and dad, but didn't it make her somewhat sad to go over and visit his mother because of her condition?
Absolutely.
And it was really not high on her list of things that she wanted to do.
Maggie went there a lot. She just didn't feel like she needed to go every day like Alec liked to go.
And Alec would go every day and sometimes more than once a day.
As much as he could, he did.
And but Maggie cared for Mr. Randolph, and I know she loved him. I'm talking about she would, prepare food for him and tried to spoil him, wouldn't she?
It was the no salt diet.
Right.
And they were all struggling to cook food that he would eat with no salt.
And she experimented with different things, hopefully that he would enjoy, right?
Right. The whole family was taking turns and trying to provide meals.
And now that on the 7th, I think in the afternoon, and we'll establish this later, but, around 4:30, Mr. Randolph got admitted back to the hospital in Savannah.
I know that now.
Right. And you said earlier that you expected from your conversation with Maggie that she was going to go over to Almeda and see Alex's parents on the evening of the 7th, but and you found it odd afterwards when you found out she didn't.
Correct.
But knowing that Alex's dad was not there and he was back in the hospital, it doesn't really seem that odd anymore, does it?
Probably not.
You and Bart received awful phone call on the night of the 7th about Maggie and Paul's death, right?
We did.
And it was from John Marmon.
Randy.
Randy.
Sorry, I misspoke earlier.
And one of the requests was that you and Bart go and tell your parents in person, right?
Mhm. Well, I don't know that they requested, but I knew we had to do that in person.
So you did that in person.
Yes.
And then the next day, you came to Moselle with your parents.
Correct.
And Alex, was he grieving greatly?
Oh, terribly.
I mean, people have
We were all,
described him as being destroyed. Would you agree with that assessment?
yes,
And Buster was there?
yes.
Okay. And I jumped ahead, but leading up, Maggie enjoyed being at Edisto over Moselle in the summertime.
Correct. I think most people would.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it a lot more than being at Moselle.
Right.
But Alec had to stay at Moselle, or did stay at Moselle, because his work was right there in Hampton, right?
Right.
And Alec was constantly wanting Maggie to come back and stay with him at Moselle, wasn't he?
Perhaps. I'm not sure. I don't think he really liked being by himself.
But when he asked Maggie to come back on the 7th, I mean, you didn't think that was really an unusual request, because he wanted to be with Maggie.
Right.
And didn't like to be by himself.
I did not think it was unusual, and that's why I encouraged her to do so.
And you, from your conversation with Maggie, you knew that Paul was going to be there.
Correct.
Right. And do you know why Paul was going to be there? Had you heard?
I didn't know at the time. I know now.
That's it. But anyway, and you encouraged Maggie to go be with Alec, because his dad was in bad shape.
Right.
Now, after Maggie and Paul were murdered, Mr. Randolph died 2 days later, I believe, or 3 days.
Mhm.
So it was a very difficult time for everyone, wasn't it?
Very.
And there were 2 funerals, one on a Saturday for Maggie and Paul, and one on Sunday for Mr. Randolph, right? And then after a day or so, did Alec and Buster come to Somerville and stay with your parents?
Yes.
And did they stay with your parents a lot after the murders?
Yes, especially Alec.
Yeah, Alec. And to your knowledge, did Alec ever spend another night at Moselle after the murders?
He did not.
She stayed with your parents. He visited with you and your husband and family down at Key West at sometime at the end of July. Is that right?
He did.
And then he and Buster came up to Greenville up at one point in time.
They did.
And then he was staying with his brother Randy at times. He was all over the place.
He was.
Now, you mentioned that after the murders that Alex said that he was very intent on clearing Paul's name from the voting accident, right? And you knew that that Maggie felt very strongly that Paul was not driving the boat when the beautiful Mallory Beach came to her tragic death, right?
Correct.
I mean, Maggie was adamant. She was on a mission to clear Paul's name, was she not?
Sort of.
Sort of. And she was, and you're not critical of Alex for wanting to clear Paul's name after he was murdered, do you? Are you?
I'm not critical about that at all. I think that was his way of honoring Paul after he was gone. I just thought his priority should have been focusing on finding out who killed Maggie and Paul.
And how do you know that wasn't a priority?
We never talked about it. We never talked about finding the person who could have done it. It was just odd. And we were sort of living in fear because we thought this horrible person was out there, and we were mostly afraid for Alec and Buster, but we didn't know the motive behind the killings. We thought it probably had something to do with the boat case.
Right.
And we thought that up until September.
Right.
And then things started to change a little bit.
Sure. Well, were you aware that Alec started carrying a gun after the murder? You didn't know
Alec
that?
always carried a gun.
What's that?
He always carried a gun.
On his person that he started carrying a gun. Were you aware of that?
I knew he usually had one in his car.
Right. I want to ask you just some sort of one topic kind of questions. Bubba was Maggie and Alex's dog, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Bubba could be a little hard-headed, we've heard.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm sorry. Yes, Bubba. I think Bubba could be a handful.
But it's pretty clear that Alec could control Bubba pretty well.
Yes.
And Maggie enjoyed going down to the kennels, as far as you know, to play with the dogs.
She did.
Right. And she was a dog lover.
She was.
And you're a dog lover.
I am.
And you'll have dogs. You know that they didn't allow dogs in the house at Moselle
Correct.
because of I don't know.
Allergies.
Yeah, allergies.
Right.
And
But they had a big porch, and there were dog beds all outside on the porch, and
right.
Huge buckets of water. And when I was there, the dogs were always up there at the house.
Did you know there was an electric fence around?
I did not know that there was an electric fence, but.
And did Maggie and Alec let dogs in the house down at Edison?
I don't think so. They stayed mostly underneath the house. She
They
had
had
a
like
pen,
Right.
big pen down there.
So they had a dog run type thing underneath the house.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And did you ever go to Edison and visit with
Yes.
Maggie and Alec and their family?
Yes.
And would Paul's friends and Buster's friends welcome at
Always.
at Edison and at Moselle?
Yes.
And
Maggie loved having the boys' friends around.
And I think you mentioned this, but Moselle, was Moselle Paul's passion?
Yes,
He loved that place?
yes,
And Alec enjoyed being there with Paul? Is that right?
yes, he did.
And, one second, Your Honor. Just very briefly, in your own words, you tell the jury what you believe Alec's relationship was with Paul.
I think they had a very good relationship. They loved all the same things. They loved to hunt, they loved to fish, they loved to work the land. I think the plan was for Paul to take over Moselle one day. And they had a great father-son relationship.
And in your own words, can you tell the jury what you believe Alec's relationship with Maggie was?
It was good. It wasn't perfect, but Maggie was happy. And I think she was happy.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Read that right.
May it please court, Your Honor. When Maggie called you on the afternoon of June 7th, 2021, she reported to you that her whole purpose for going home was to go with Alec to visit Alameda. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
What did Maggie tell you her whole purpose was in going home and Alec wanting her to come home on June 7th, 2021?
She was going home to be with Alec and visit his parents at Alameda.
And it was such a point of contention that you actually encouraged her to go.
I did.
You were asked some questions about you testified about Alec not being focused on trying to figure out who killed Maggie and Paul, and then something happened in September. Is that right?
Correct.
And that changed for you as you started to look at the motive. Is that correct? That's what you just testified, correct?
Correct.
And in September, he got fired from the law firm, right?
Correct.
And it started to come out about years and years of theft and misappropriation from clients. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
Objection sustained.
What came out in September that changed your calculus?
And objection exceeding the scope of cross.
Objections overruled.
Please answer the question.
We were on our way to a football game and we received a phone call from a friend of ours saying how sorry they.
This issue that has not been ruled upon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you go to the jury room. Please do not discuss the case. Nature of the objection.
Your Honor, she was about to testify that she had heard about the roadside shooting. The state has not gone into the roadside shooting yet. Your Honor's not ruled on whether that's admissible or not. We object to under 403 as to being admissible. And the substantively, that is the objection, evidence of the roadside shooting. It just opens up a whole new avenue of issues Secondly, what she knows thus far would be hearsay, which is a technical objection, but certainly we object to any evidence of the roadside shooting.
Your Honor, at this point, of course, this is responsive to a question that was raised on cross-examination by Mr. Griffin, in which he testified something happened in September. So for that reason, just to begin with, I believe that door is opened as to her to explain what it was that changed at that period in time, which was the nature of my question to her. Additionally, I think if we look beyond that, there is a connection if we want to talk and have in-camera hearing about her answer and about 403 and 404. There is a logical connection between what happened in the roadside shooting and what happened on June 7th, 2021. And that connection is, of course, that the evidence will show that as the temperature increases, as there's a confrontation for Alex Murdaugh, then things like this happen. And that's what happened on September. But as it relates to this specific witness, this was an answer that came up during the defense cross. And it's fair to explore with this witness now what changed in September, which she's already testified to from a defense question.
And what was the question that prompted the response that you now indicate opens the door for this? Yes.
So in that particular question and in her response, he asked her, and he had been, of course, engaging in great detail about the family relationship and that sort of thing, and put up a picture and all the rest of it, and asked her about her assessment at that particular time, and she went in and started to explain that, and he was specifically asking about Alec being concerned about clearing Paul's name in the boat case, and then she explained further that, and he asked her if that was any big deal, and then she went on to explain her answer, and that's when she talked about how everything changed in September, and that was what I was exploring, what happened in September, which has been testimony before this jury, and I think now fair game for them to understand what happened in September.
All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was not the question.
What was the question? That was my question to Mr. Waters, and he's explained a whole lot. I don't know if he responded to my question. Maybe you will. What was the question that you posed that generated the response about her concern and her concerns changing?
The question that I asked related to her, I said, you testified previously that you didn't believe Alec was concerned about finding out who did this, or more concerned about clearing Paul's name. And then she says, well, it seemed odd he wasn't concerned about finding out who did this. And I said, why do you think he was not concerned? And then she goes into testifying, well, initially we thought it was the boating accident. And then after September, we thought perhaps it's something completely different. And I mean, I was exploring her testimony on direct, and she offered up the issue of the roadside shooting. So I didn't ask anything about the roadside shooting, Your Honor. I was asking her why she thought Alec was not trying to, what was the basis of her belief that Alec wasn't trying to find out who did this?
All right, Mr. Waters.
And I apologize if I wasn't more clear. I don't remember the specific question, but what I do.
Court reporters, we'll have Ms. Harris, if you'll go back a bit to Mr. Griffin and his questioning of Ms. Proctor. Back to Maggie being solely consumed about the, I don't know how far that was, Maggie being consumed about the boating accident, and if it's not too far back from there on up to where you are now. And if you need a break, we can take one for you to locate it.
I'm looking for the question.
Right.
You're not critical about Alex wanting to clear Paul's name.
Need to be loud enough for me to hear you at least. Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, this one. Okay. You're not critical about Alex wanting to clear Paul's name. After he was murdered, are you? I am not critical about that at all. I think that was his way of honoring Paul after he was gone. I just thought his priority should have been focusing on finding out who killed Maggie and Paul. And how do you know that wasn't a priority? We never talked about it. We never talked about finding the person who could have done it. It was just odd. And we were sort of living in fear because we thought this horrible person was out there and we didn't. We were mostly afraid for Alex and Buster. We didn't know the motive behind the killings. We thought it was probably had something to do with the boat case, right? And we thought that up until September. All right. And then things started to change a little bit. Were you aware that Alex started carrying a gun?
All right, Mr. Waters.
Your Honor, again, these were in direct responses to his question as he was exploring her statement about his concern on the boat case. And in fact, the reference to September was actually in response to a follow-up question that the defense continued down that line of questioning. That answer has now come out, and I think that that the witness, again, is entitled and is fair game at this point.
That's fine. So what changed in September?
What she meant by that. Yes, sir. What she meant by that.
And what changed in September?
Do you want me to talk to them?
Yes, ma'am.
So we received a phone call from a friend of ours who said he was so sorry to hear about my brother-in-law. And the call came in to my husband, Bart. And Bart said, "What are you talking about? We don't know anything." And he said, "Well, your brother-in-law's been shot." And we literally stopped the car, pulled over on the side of the road, and it was just the worst feeling in the world because I thought whoever had killed Maggie and Paul had now shot Alec, and I was horrified that Buster was next. So we made a phone call to Buster, and Buster said his dad had been shot, but that he was okay. He was on his way or in the hospital at that time. I can't remember. And then at some point, and I'm not sure, I think I was in shock. At some point, we spoke with Jim Griffin that day. And he told us that, yes, Alec had been shot, that he had been fired from the law firm because he had been caught stealing money.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Again, that's her explanation, and I believe that's fair game in this particular instance to this particular witness's testimony that had come out on cross-examination. And I probably would have one follow-up. Additionally, I should mention as well, I think there's two other matters that probably we should explore while the jury's out, in fairness to the other side and in court, that I wanted to inquire that were in reference to cross-examination. Those are different issues. I was going
into them. Tell me what they are. So.
Sure. There were Obviously, extensive cross-examination about the family relationship, and there's been extensive evidence offered by the defense on cross about the family relationship. And there were two questions I was going to ask her about fidelity concerns, and also the Maggie and the family wrestling with opioid abuse and pill usage by the defendant. Both of those have been issues that Maggie had wrestled with and had expressed to her.
All right, Mr. Griffin.
Well, as to the, I don't know if you want me to address the roadside shooting, but that certainly, I mean, that opens up Pandora's box of 404B. They want to introduce the roadside shooting as motive. How can you have motive after the fact? And so it's not admissible. It should not be admissible under 403. But just what she says is not that harmful, but they're not going to stop there, Your Honor. And I did not open the door. I said,
You're probing her about Alex's fears. Doesn't Alex, were you aware that he started carrying a gun? Well, he always carries a gun in his car. No, but then he started carrying it in his pockets. So you're having her, cross-examining her to suggest that Alex was living in fear, as evidenced by the fact that he continued or started carrying a gun, not in his vehicle, but on his person. And her response is, well, I never, didn't appear to me that he was living in fear. I didn't know anything about that and responding to you until in September when this occurred for whatever reason. Now, with the truth of what occurred, she's not testifying as an investigator. She said she heard he'd been shot. And that changed her reason for concern in some way, whatever that might be, I don't know. Did you still have a reason for concern? Are you about Alex's safety, or was it changed? Was it altered?
That day, and for some time after that, we were very concerned for the family. We felt like someone was after them, but then we started finding out about other things that had been going on in Alex's life. And
this is in part based on your conversation with Mr. Griffin.
This is everything that has come out since then.
Did you say that you had a conversation with Mr. Griffin?
That day that we found out that Alec had been shot, we did have a conversation with Mr. Griffin, and he's the
Griffin
one.
told you that he'd been fired and that he'd been caught stealing money.
Correct.
that's just hearsay.
Well,
Absolutely.
what kind of quandary does that put you in? You're going to be a witness as well?
Well, that's a hearsay statement, Your Honor. Without a doubt, it's classic hearsay.
It's the basis for her fear or not having fear, which is something you, or fear or believing that Alex was in fear. That's something that you are probing. Aside from that issue, how about the family relationship issue, fidelity, opioid abuse, concerns?
Your Honor, with regard to fidelity, I mean, we can hear what she says about it, but the evidence, as I understand it, is 10 or 15 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but it was more than 10 years ago. There was some issue about someone that Alec had known in college reaching out to him. Maggie got angry about that. They had a
reaching out to him 15 years ago or recently?
Yes, yes. And that Maggie got angry about it. Contacted the woman's husband, who says It's not true. I know who she's seeing because I have a private eye on her. That led to a divorce.
You're now referring to a 15-year-old conversation.
Yes. And then the opioid stuff, Your Honor, is, I'm not sure what information she's going to share about that, frankly.
Well, you had one earlier witness read a letter about him being in rehab.
That they introduced, yes, sir.
That you published.
It's already in evidence, Your Honor.
All
Never
right.
objection.
Go ahead, Mr. Waters.
So on both of those issues, first of all, with the first.
By the way, you can step down for a break. Don't discuss your case. You're fine? Okay, good. All right.
With the issue of the first matter, I think it's certainly a fair question to say, did Maggie ever express to you any concerns? Were there ever any concerns and issues with the defendant's fidelity? I think that's clearly in response to the extensive evidence been offered by the defense.
You said, has she ever, such as 15 years ago?
Well, I think that my follow-up question would be, was that something that remained in Maggie's mind over the years up until?
And she would know that.
I think that if I asked her that question, she could express an answer to that. Yes, sir.
No. What is the answer to that?
It was an affair that happened, or Maggie thought it was an affair that happened many years ago. They were able to resolve the issues, but Maggie still brought it up.
As recently as when?
A year ago. She did not think anything was going on. It still bothered her.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
During when that event occurred, did she make Alec leave the household for a period of time?
She did.
Frame when this happened. I mean,
I understand. 15 years ago, or?
How long ago was that?
It was a very long time ago. I'm not sure. A very long time ago.
I think, again, I'm not trying to make it bigger than it is, but I think given the issues that have been squarely in front of the jury, the state's entitled, at least in a limited fashion, to offer this some testimony in this regard that that everything was not perfect as the defense has repeatedly elicited. And so on that particular issue, I only propose a limited question that had Maggie ever had any concerns about fidelity, and had those concerns continued to bother her? And that would be the extent of my proposed examination of her on that issue.
All right. Anything else?
It's 2007 is our understanding. 2007, 15 years ago.
Well, yeah, 2007 was 15 years ago. Yeah.
And that's when it occurred.
Well, that's been established. Give me something new.
Well,
other than repeating 15 years ago.
It's not admissible under 403. Unfair prejudice outweighs the probative value of this. Whether it still bothered her, I mean, she testified that they weren't without their problems like all married couples, but they had a good marriage. I mean, it's been addressed, and it's highly inflammatory.
That's why your questions have to not lead into things that might be inflammatory. We're going to be in recess for about 15 minutes. Please.
Also Bob Murdaugh, who's been staying with us from the criminal defense. He's also a criminal defense attorney, but he has a podcast of Defense Diaries. Okay, let me start with you, Jeffrey. This is fascinating. This is an example of why cross-examination can be so dangerous. And Judge Newman just said, well, give me something. You brought it up concerning what changed in September about her opinion about whether Alex Murdaugh was telling the truth, fidelity issues, marital issues, opioid abuse. Talk to me, Jeffrey Wolf.
Yeah, I mean, these
this issue really is bringing up the two largest principles in cross-examination, especially from the defense side. Number one, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. And number two, when you get what you need, get out of there. Be precise, be surgical with your questions. This is something where he really didn't quite know where this was going to go. He thought she was on his side, thought she was going to give him good answers, and just enjoyed the meat on the bone. You could see him constantly referring back to his notes to figure out where he was and where he was going to go next. He was ill prepared. He asked a bad question, and it opened the door. And the judge is about to let it all in. Whether he's right or he's wrong is immaterial. It's all coming in right now. And the thing that was kind of shocking to me is that it seems like he's actually considering letting in the infidelity and the opioid abuse as well, which I don't think he opened the door to that. I think that that is a smear campaign by the prosecution, especially a 15-year-old affair allegation that was found to not be founded is suddenly going to come in and make it look like he's cheating on his wife today. That's dark.
Now, Bob Murdaugh, okay, we have about a minute left. But there's also another connection because when the accountant testified, the defense asked a question about a $500,000 payment to Cousin Eddie. As we know, Cousin Eddie was the one who was supposedly going to shoot Alex Murdaugh on the side of the road, but didn't get to it. So you have that the prosecution didn't refer to that may link these up. Talk to me, Bob. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, we're all waiting for Cousin Eddie. That the state's supposed to be closing their case in chief tomorrow. I'm assuming that Cousin Eddie's coming in. If this gets in, that is going to be a perfect segue to put some context to Cousin Eddie's testimony tomorrow. So we'll see what happens, but I tend to agree. I think the judge is going to let it in. Just in case people don't know, opening the door is inadmissible. What would otherwise be inadmissible evidence is now, because of the question asked by the defense, potentially going to be let in.
Oh boy, I'm so glad both of you are here to talk about this because along with me, we're all defense attorneys and we know, and we all said it when it was happening. Oh my gosh, go back to the September question. And we think we all agree the judge is going to let a truck be driven through the answer that Maggie's sister gave. Stay with us on the other side. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Linda Kenny Bodden. While we are covering the trial of Alex Murdaugh for the murder of his wife and his son just in 2021. There have been fireworks in that courtroom just now as the defense and the prosecution sparred as to whether the defense opened the door to Alex Murdaugh's infidelity that happened a long time ago, 15 years, and whether they also opened the door to cousin Eddie and the roadside shooting. So our own Gigi McKelvey was in the courtroom. I haven't spoken to you, Gigi, since the bomb threat of last Wednesday. I can't believe that's under a week ago. What happened in that courtroom right now while Marion Proctor, the sister of Maggie Murdaugh, was on the stand?
Well, it was nice to actually have a voice for Maggie in that courtroom today. We haven't had that yet, but man, did it take a turn after cross, because they asked about, she mentioned in September things started changing and kind of insinuated this was about the roadside shooting. We all kind of know that's what it is. The jury's not supposed to know. So the prosecution jumps all over it and says, "Hey, we can talk about this." They open the door. Griffin's like, "We didn't open the door." And then at one point, he recalls a conversation that he had with Miss Proctor, and then Jim says his own conversation was hearsay. The courtroom just kind of busted out laughing.
Yeah, and opening the door means that the defense went to an area that probably wouldn't have been admissible, but they got elicited an answer to a question where Marion Proctor had said, they were all really scared for the family, except for Alex Murdaugh. He really wasn't scared for the family. We didn't understand it, but then things all changed in September. So tell me, we all know that it's the cousin Eddie, and supposedly he was supposed to shoot Alex Murdaugh on the side of the road. Eddie says, I think he didn't do it. But does the courtroom, did everyone go, oh, when that happened, since we all know about cousin Eddie? And that brings me to my B question. Is he now going to testify?
Well, there was definitely a reaction in the courtroom when September was mentioned, because so far, as we know, that hasn't come in, and cousin Eddie has been like the one person everybody's waiting on. So maybe now that comes in. I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but Judge Newman is not really enjoying these delays for stuff like this, getting very snippy with both sides, actually.
Yeah, interesting. Now, one final question. Marion Proctor, as you pointed out, is the voice of her sister. We now get to see her sister through Marion Proctor, who is 7 years older. But she did say two things I thought were helpful for the prosecution. One, basically that Maggie and Paul essentially were, and it's my word, lured to the shooting ranch, as she called it, at one point, because to allegedly go see the family, the father and the mother, the grandparents that night of Paul, and that Paul specifically told her, because they had conversations about it, that he never went to the kennels. Is that what you got that stood out? Is that what was standing out to the jury, you think?
I don't think that I heard that Paul never went to the kennels. I might have been a little distracted, but
I think
no,
Alec,
I don't.
Gigi. I think it was Alec never went to the kennels.
Alec. Oh, yeah. Well, that's surprising because, it seems like they did everything together on that farm, especially him and Paul. And I mean, now we know he went to the kennels. We've heard about it, and we have video about it. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I mean, we may have just delayed the state closing up their end maybe by a day if they have to bring cousin Eddie in to explain this roadside shooting now.
Oh, really interesting. Well, Gigi McKelvey, I know the court only gave a 15-minute break, so I know you want to go back in and get your seat so you can report to us later on. Thank you. As usual, you're just fabulous being our eyes and ears for a long crime in the Alex Murdaugh courtrooms. Thank you. Take care. And this gives me a chance to bring my guests back in. And again, Jeffrey Wolf and Bob Murdaugh, both criminal defense attorneys. Bob is also the host of Defense Diaries podcast. And all three of us are defense attorneys. So we kind of know when we see a moment. So Bob Murdaugh, let me start with you. The testimony of Marion Proctor, right, that I just talked to Gigi McKelvey about, that reiterated that now this is at least the third person that Alex Murdaugh said he never went to the kennels that night. But he didn't know. He didn't know that Paul had taken this video. Is this the major problem that the defense must overcome?
I think so. I think without question, it's the biggest thing. And we were talking off camera or during the break that the fact that the jurors are not armed with notebooks, we're a month into this trial, and they're going to remember the big points that were made. And for me, the biggest point that's been made thus far is the fact that Alec lied about being down at the kennels. So I think that is going to be a major issue for the defense to try to work around. But I think in the minds of the jury, that's going to be pretty tough for them to overlook.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Wolf, I was going to do a 1-minute closing for the prosecution, thinking they were going to arrest maybe first thing in the morning, but I'm not so sure right now with Cousin Eddie. But the fact that Maggie and Paul were, my words again, lured to that property that night, the video that obviously he didn't know was taken by his son Paul, the fact that there was testimony from the dog caretaker that Bubba would be under Alec's control, and Bubba would get loose when Alec would let the rooster loose, because it was Alec's rooster brought to the kennels. And we also know what's in that video was Alec and Bubba chasing, whether it was a chicken or a guinea hen or whatever, that he appeared at the mom's unexpectedly without his family. There's the missing shirt. There's 2 pairs of missing shoes. There's GSR inside a raincoat that has no wearer DNA on it, that was apparently hidden, according to the prosecution, at the mom's house. The GPS showed he was there. The autopsy showed that after they had their dinner, these 2 were shot pretty soon thereafter. And there was no evidence that anybody else was on the scene besides 3 minor alleles under Maggie's nail, which, as we know, in a gunshot long-range shooting, you don't get DNA from the shooter usually. Jeffrey, talk to our jury, the audience.
Jay, you said you weren't going to do the closing, but there it is. That's the classic prosecution mountain of evidence closing argument, right? You hear prosecutors do that all the time. There's this, and then there's this, and there's this. And eventually this is going to get too high for Mr. Murdaugh to be able to get past to get you to reasonable doubt. Well, that is the prosecution's job to do that. The defense's job is to poke holes in each of those arguments. And I think the lack of juror notebooks, as Bob was just mentioning, is really important. And I agree with him that they are going to go to the salient points. But what they're also going to do is they're going to go to what happens in shorter, less serious trials. It's going to become more like a used car sale. You buy from the person you trust. And so the jury is going to form a relationship with everybody in that courtroom throughout the trial, like every jury does. They're going to look at the judge as their parent, the person who takes care of them, and then they're going to be romanced by the 2 sets of lawyers. And whoever they trust the most is who they're going to take to the dance. And so when you can't remember everything, you're looking at those closing arguments and deciding which person you believe. And it's going to be up to the prosecution to skew the evidence in the way that is most favorable to them, and the defense is going to do the exact same thing. They're going to highlight the things that play to them. They're going to highlight the DNA that nobody's able to identify as their straw man. They're going to highlight the marks on the skull from the gunshot to say that maybe is a suicide. So maybe it was a murder-suicide where he took out his mom. They're going to highlight the happy marriage. They're going to highlight that her own sister took the stand and was sympathetic towards him. They're going to highlight all the good stuff, and the prosecution is going to highlight all the bad stuff. And the jury, who is going to be relying on their memory and their emotions and their gut, is going to dance with who they are most attracted to, the lawyer they trust the most. And that is going to be the job of both sides in this case.
And Bob Mott, as Jeffrey points out, the role of a defense attorney or prosecutor to closing is to give the tidbits, is to give the talking points in that jury room for people and jurors that you believe are on your side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you give it to them, so they go in and they can talk. So I have some additional talking points that may have been like in the wash, shall we say, and that is the fact that the shotgun shells that they recovered only had Paul's DNA, no indication of a third party, that the Benelli shotgun had inside the barrel DNA of Maggie and Alec. These are little things that I think the prosecution can weave into their summation. Your thoughts?
I agree, and at this point, it seems like it's too late for them to do so. I mean, maybe they can get it in at some point, but as you know, if it's not brought in through a witness, they're not going to be able to argue it at closing because it's not in evidence. So I agree. I think the state has whiffed a bit on a couple of pretty salient points. And I think that comes part and parcel with the fact that they're essentially trying 2 cases here. I mean, we've got kind of a white collar crime case going on with all the financial stuff, which they needed to do. in order to be able to push forward what their motive is. The downside of that is that, you're going to miss things. There's that old axiom that sometimes less is more. And, and that goes right back to Jim's cross-examination. So, we'll see how it plays out, but I agree. I think that they've missed some potentially pretty damning stuff that they could have wove in that would have connected some dots.
Yeah, very, very interesting because the constant comment I see that the prosecution just didn't have a coherent theme. But sometimes, as you both know, juries will then pick up that battalion. They'll just say, or pick up that baton and they'll say, well, I'm not going to let the victims be short shrifted here. We're going to go through the evidence. We're going to see for ourselves. We will find for ourselves. No one's going to tell us what to do, or just because somebody may have been, and my word, incompetent or not up to what their standard is. We're not going to hold it against the victims. We're going to try to find the truth. Anyhow, in terms of finding the truth, back in that courtroom we will go. But first, we must take a break. Stay with us here at the Law and Crime Network. We're in the Alex Murdaugh double homicide trial.
Be seated.
The witness can testify as to her concern as to what occurred on September 7th that changed her concern about Alex living in fear. She cannot testify as to on the fidelity issue because that's too remote in time and would tend to confuse the jury. She can testify that she discovered that he'd been fired and that and that he had a drug problem.
Your Honor, depending on how the testimony goes, we would have hearsay objections if she's testifying as to what someone told her.
She's not testifying as to the truth of it. She's responding to why her concerns were changed based on in part of her conversations with you.
No, I understand
As
that.
an agent for Mr. Murdaugh.
No, I understand that. My point I just stood to address is the family wrestling with opioid and pill use by the defendant. That is hearsay. If that's how she knows.
She already had a drug problem. I mean, if you want to talk about specifically, I don't know to what degree she discovered his drug problem, opioid addiction, or whatever it is, but it's already in evidence anyway.
No, I understand. I'm just advising the court that I will be making hearsay objections if that's
Yes,
she's
I
testifying about
understand.
hearsay.
Anything else before the jury comes?
Nothing from the state this time, Your Honor.
All right, bring the jury. All these issues. The objection is overruled. You may continue.
May I please score, Your Honor? Ms. Proctor, when we left on the break, I was asking you what happened in September that caused you to change your assessment. Can you describe that to the jury, please?
On September 4th, we were headed to a football game, and my husband Bart received a phone call from a friend saying he was so sorry to hear about what had happened to my brother-in-law. And we had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, well, we've heard, he told us he had been shot. So we pulled over on the side of the road. We were all in hysterics. We called Buster, and Buster said yes, that his dad had been shot, that he was being airlifted to the hospital, that they thought hoped he was going to be okay. So we wanted more information, so we called Jim Griffin, and he told us that Alec had been shot in the head and that he had been fired from his law firm for stealing.
What was your concern when you heard that he had been shot?
Initially, I thought he might be dead. I had just lost 2 of the family members, and I felt like they were being targeted at that point. I felt like the family was being targeted.
Subsequent to that, did your concern that the family was being targeted, did that change as well?
Over the course of a few weeks, we were still on high alert, worried for Buster. But at that point, information started coming out about some things that Alec had done financially that we had no idea about.
And that changed your assessment about what you heard about him being shot as well, is that correct? Can you answer out loud?
The shooting, that was an event in itself. The roadside shooting.
You just stated that the shooting itself, the roadside shooting, was an event in itself. Did other information come to your attention that changed your assessment about the roadside shooting at a later time?
Yes.
and changed that initial concern that Alec was somehow being targeted.
Yes.
Did Maggie have a nickname for Paul?
As little, what is detective?
Little detective?
Mhm.
And what did that mean?
She felt like that he was always looking to make sure his dad was behaving.
And what specifically was the concern?
Pills, prescription pain pills.
And had Maggie expressed to you concern over time about the defendant's pill usage?
Yes.
How long had that been going on?
I am not sure, but I think it had been going on for some time.
And did that concern continue up until recent times as we moved to their Maggie and Paul's murder?
Yes.
And what did specifically little detective mean as it related to the pills?
If there were pills in the house that his dad was taking that he wasn't supposed to, Paul was determined that he would find them.
And did that happen on occasions?
I think so, yes.
Hold on for me 1 second. What specifically changed your perception of the roadside shooting after your initial concern?
The story that was initially told about what happened came to not be true.
The story told by who?
Alec.
Alec? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Anything further? Thank you. You may step down. We'll call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Bard Proctor.
Raise your right hand, put down the Bible, please. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thank you.
All right, if you would please, sir, sit in that chair over there, take your full name for the record, spell your last name, and then speak into the mic.
My name is Barton Proctor, Proctor.
Proctor, good afternoon. Very quickly, tell the jury, are you Marion Proctor's husband?
For 37 years.
37 years. And obviously, over the years, being part of this family, have you gotten to know Maggie and gotten to know Paul and gotten to know the defendant, Alex Murdaugh?
I have.
I don't want to belabor the points, but in the aftermath of Maggie and Paul's murder, were you also privy to some of the conversations that Alec had that your wife related to this jury today?
Yes.
And ultimately heard the same thing in those conversations that she related here today?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to review what's been entered into evidence as States 297, the kennel video?
I've heard it.
May I have the computer input, please?
It was on there.
For the record, I'm going to play States 297.
Quick, Cash. Hey, you got burgers now. Hey, Bubba. It's a kitty. This is a chicken. Catch. Quick.
Do you recognize any voices on that video?
I recognize 3.
Can you tell the jury what voices you recognize?
I recognize Paul Murdaugh. I recognize Maggie Murdaugh, and I recognize Alex Murdaugh.
And when you say Alex Murdaugh, do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for the jury, please?
Yes,
Or
sir.
describe him?
He's wearing a blue blazer and has his glasses on his head.
And how sure are you?
100%.
Thank you. Please answer any questions the defense may have.
Hey, Mr. Proctor. Were you ever shown a blue raincoat by any SLED agents?
Yes, sir.
And was that blue raincoat shown to you and your wife Marion, who just was here in the courtroom?
Yes, sir. It's a picture.
A picture of the blue raincoat. And did you recognize the blue raincoat?
No, sir.
Had you ever seen it before?
No, sir.
Did you ever see Paul wear it? The blue raincoat?
I'd never recognized it before.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Say, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. We have another witness today.
Your Honor, as you're aware, there was a circumstance beyond any party's control. No, because of a circumstance beyond the party's control.
Very good. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no more witnesses available today. And this is Valentine's Day. So we will recess at this time and resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. Mr. Waters, the jury is gone. You can further explain if you'd like. You can further explain
The issue with the scheduling? Yes, sir. There's witnesses that are coming forward. There's a unavoidable, unfortunate personal event that has arisen that unfortunately has affected that witness's availability, Your Honor. And so that's why we had requested, we are late in the day, but have requested a recess for the day. Your Honor, I will say that with the side of the road issue has always been out there. And at this point, we believe there is some admissibility as to that, particularly a statement of the defendant related to that, in which there's actually a few statements, but there's one statement in particular. I don't know if Your Honor wants to proffer that at this particular time, since we have a little time available outside the jury's presence. But I do think that at some point that's a bridge, given developments, that needs to be crossed.
Yes, sir.
We've prepared a memo. We would be prepared to argue that motion, but we're not today. So we expected this to go through, no motion to be argued today. I apologize to court, but we would prefer not to go forward with it today.
You said you're preparing or have prepared a memo?
Person preparing it.
All right. Stop the jury and have them come at another time if need be, 10 o'clock, 10:30, whatever.
Done with that. We're hoping we're not anticipating it coming up at all.
Can you all don't leave with the jury yet? If you can find out, are they gone or still here? You have them hold for a moment.
Have completed the memo, filed it. Your Honor has it on the 404B issue. There's a section on the roadside.
Has it been sent to me or is it being sent?
Your Honor, it was filed well before trial, and it is a consolidated memo. It addresses all the 404B stuff, the financial evidence that you've ruled in, and in the section of the memo, we do address the roadside shooting. We point out that it's after June 7th. We point out that he's been indicted for insurance fraud. As a result of that, attempted insurance fraud, their theory of motive is it is just another way for him to gain sympathy when financial situations turn badly for him. But we point out that he has been indicted by Hampton County grand jury for insurance fraud for attempted suicide to obtain $12 million of insurance for his son Buster. And so we argue that it's not motive, and it should not be admissible under 403 as well.
All right, and I'm happy to talk about all of that and review what's been submitted overnight and review whatever the state may have for me to consider, and to hear any more argument about it in the morning prior to ruling. I've had them to stop the jury from leaving to find out how much time you all might need tomorrow morning, because otherwise I've told them to be here at 9:30 if they need to come at 10 o'clock, 10:30. Tarpoogie.
Your Honor, I don't think this will take 30 minutes to argue. I prefer to argue it in the morning simply because we haven't looked at it. And while Mr. Griffin is an extraordinary advocate, I'd like an opportunity.
Want the jury to come in at 10?
10 would be great.
I would say 10:30 to be safe, Your Honor.
Why I'd argued against that. I'm trying to think of a reason, but I really can't.
So we're going to have the jury come in at 10:30 tomorrow morning instead of 9:30.
Said, dang, that's loud.
Thank you.
Super duper loud.
All right.
10:30.
In the interim, however, if you all have something you want me to read overnight, early in the morning, happy to receive it.
Yes, sir.
I have what was
I don't know if he
previously
really means
filed
that.
now. Defendant's memorandum in opposition to motion in limine re-evidence of other crimes and bad acts. And I've ruled on a majority of this already.
We may polish that up a little bit tonight, and if so, we'll email it to your law clerk, and she, I'm sure, will get it to you.
Page 9 starts the roadside shooting discussion.
Your Honor, and the reply also touched this ground as well, but we can do the same thing.
Middle of page 9 through the top of page 12. So you have about 2.5 pages that you might want to, if you want to supplement it, it'd be fine.
Thank
If
you.
you want to. And how about from the state's perspective?
Yes, sir, Your Honor, and I think I just lost my glasses. Put them up. Your Honor, if you look at our response opposition that was
So far, these
filed
witnesses
on
haven't done much for the
December
prosecution.
8th. We, on page 19, in the factual recitation, we talk about specifically the shooting on the side of the road in response to the confrontation with Chris Wilson. And then, of course, from that point on, and prior to that, there is analysis, general analysis on 404 and 403. I believe our reply, which I'm trying to put my hands on, also addresses those issues, but we can also polish up some things as well. For Your Honor, there is, thank you, Mr. James.
Thank you, Mr. James.
There is, starting at page 15,
Bless
the
your heart.
reply. It is addressed as well, the reply to their response or in that particular series of filings. It's in there, and again, we can polish that up. There is, again, there's a recorded interview and recorded statement that we certainly can provide to Your Honor for review, that ultimately we believe their statements of the defendant, of course.
Marianne
would be
Wisniewski wants to know if
admissible,
anyone knows who the new
under
witness
theories as
report
argued
is.
there.
Or anybody out there that has any ideas on that, drop it in the comments.
And what is the state's theory of admissibility of the roadside
Barnett.
shooting?
I'm looking forward to you tomorrow. I think
Sir,
we're going to
Your
have
Honor,
a chat.
we argued back in December, and is argued in those particular briefs. What we see is a chain of circumstances that are connected for an extended period of time that particularly highlight and start in June 7th. We've gone into, obviously, Your Honor, moving into the financial situation as it went into July and the efforts to shore up that particular money, the loans. Mr. Burney testified to that today. But of course, Mr. Murdaugh, there's already been evidence admitted that he was $192,000 short, and that Chris Wilson covered that. The evidence goes on that in that particular interim of time, and again with the state's theory, that he's able to do his best to try to cover things up in that interim period. But then everything comes to a head, as already been testified to in September 4th. Chris Wilson, of course, has also already testified that particular day on September 4th, that he finally got the defendant to agree to meet with him and confronted him about that 192, which again is right at the heart of the Ferris fees, which are right at the heart of June 7th, 2021. And had that confrontation with him. The admissions that were made have already been testified to. And then with a short period of time in response to that, that the side of the road shooting happened. You've already heard testimony here from Ms. Proctor that, of course, the initial reaction of everyone is, oh my gosh, the real killers are back. And that's precisely, under the state's theory, the effect that the defendant intended. And there will be, from these recorded statements, ultimately evidence offered that was not true, and he had told lies, Your Honor, about that particular. And that would be the recorded statement that we would offer about when he admitted that he had been untruthful to law enforcement about the circumstances of that shooting. I don't intend to go into great detail about that. I'm just trying to get from point A to point B. and then get out. I'm not trying to use the term that I've used before, gild the lily.
The statement that you reference, that you say you want to put in, a recorded statement?
That's correct, Your Honor. Yes, sir.
What's the length of that recorded statement?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's less than 15 minutes, Your Honor.
No, it's longer than that, no more than 30. Mr. Griffin and I were there when he gave the recorded statement. We called them to give the recorded statement.
And the gist of the recorded statement is what? Mr.
Your Honor, okay, so Mr. Murdaugh had somebody shoot him in the head on the roadside to have a $10 or $12 million insurance policy paid to his son Buster. Now, he believed it was suicide contestability cause, so he had somebody shoot him in the head. No question they shot him in the head. No question the intent was to kill him. He fractured his skull, had a brain bleed, was airlifted to Savannah Hospital. It didn't kill him. He intended to die. And the recorded statement, he immediately went to detox because he was planning to go to detox anyway. Mr. Griffin and I went down to Atlanta. We met with him in detox. He'd been through a horrible experience, shot in the head, and then detox. And we informed him the police were looking for whoever shot him. And he, at that point, said, look, this is what happened. And I don't want them wasting, and literally he said, I don't want them wasting resources trying to solve this shooting when those resources could be used to find who killed Maggie and Paul. We picked up the phone. We called SWED. We put him on the phone with SWED to have him explain exactly what happened. This wasn't the result of a SWED interrogation. This was a voluntary statement. So they quit wasting resources looking for, and he told them who shot him in the head, and a guy named Eddie Smith, who was his drug dealer. So that's.
And you all have brought his name up a couple of times through cross-examination. Is he on the state's witness list?
Yes, Your Honor. But Your Honor, one aspect of that, and I think this is what highlights the relevance and the connection with this particular case, is that in the wake of the side of the road shooting, Mr. Murdaugh's initial claim was that some unknown individual had a flat tire, and some unknown individual, supposedly under the guise of stopping for help, then suddenly shot him in the head. He went so far as to draw have with a composite artist to draw a composite photograph. Again, I'm not trying to get into too much with the detail, but that, of course, the immediate effect of that is that he's been targeted by some unknown individual. That was a complete lie, and that's the point of that statement.
If the issue here is that Mr. Murdaugh lies, I mean, really, are we at that? I mean, we've come $10 million through lies, and now this piece of evidence becomes relevant because it proves he lied again months after the murder. There's no, he didn't do it, and I think they will concede he didn't do it to get some sort of sympathy. He did it to be dead. That's why he did it. And unfortunately, Eddie Smith, at 4 feet, couldn't shoot somebody in the head and kill him. He meant to.
And that's what Mr. Smith would say?
Mr. Smith has given no less, I'm set up to cross-examine him, I know there's 6 different explanations for that and any other event you ask him about, from wasn't there to I was there and I saw Alec, he'd been shot, to I was there and I tried to stop Alec, to yes, I shot him in the head. But the fact of the matter is the cross-examination of Mr. Smith is something I'm looking forward to now. But this particular event had nothing to do with what happened on June 7th, other than he lied about something else. And 404, unless there's a specific, it's not motive. I mean, I don't understand what the 404, 403 analysis would be on this. I know what the 403 analysis is. The prejudice outweighs the probative. The 404 is what of the 4 things that 404 is admitted for. Which one is this?
Oh man, if Eddie's on the list, guys,
Your Honor.
it might be a game changer.
Argue it in the morning, so I'm just,
Tell you what,
this is just a prelude to tomorrow morning.
Two things. Two things. If Mr. Harpootlian wishes to stipulate in front of the jury that his client is a liar, the state's willing to accept that
And
stipulation.
not go forward with this?
The second thing is, Your Honor, is that what actually happened on the side of the road is not what's important to this particular case. What is important,
Right.
Your Honor,
The interview.
is that it's
Yeah.
in reaction to the confrontation with Chris Wilson about the Ferris fees that came to the head on June 7th, 2021, and it's about what the defendant
Share the
said.
screen. If you
That he
guys
was
are on it
attacked
right
by an
now,
unknown
all I'm
assailant
asking
as he
you to
was
do
trying to
is share
change
the
a
screen.
tire and went so
That's-
far as to do a composite drawing.
all you can do
created
is
the
contribute,
effect,
and you're willing to help.
as this case
Pick
had,
a group,
as this
your
investigation
friend
had going
group,
on,
share it out to your
that,
friends.
oh my gosh, the real
that
killers
helps
are
our
back to
algorithm.
finish the
So
job. And that's
please do
precisely
that.
what he intended. And he ultimately admitted that was a lie. So the circumstances of what happened on the side of the road are not what the state is focused on. What is important is what the defendant said, how he attempted to use that, and that it was actually a falsehood. And and you heard Ms. Proctor testify, it had that exact effect, that, oh my gosh, the real killers are back.
But I think the state will concede his object on the side of the road was to be dead. That's what the act was, to kill himself.
Crazy they're even talking about this.
Now, what happened after that? After he was taken to Savannah and had a brain bleed and a fractured skull, and when he came out of all that and realized, I'm not dead. How is that relevant to June 7th? Your Honor, we can beat this.
Because in my theory
dead
here,
horse a
another
little bit
one
more in the morning.
is that if he didn't
but
do it,
allow us to give you, I don't know,
the gang that he
crazy
was running
idea of
drugs
giving
with,
maybe some more law to look at.
hit out,
All right.
and come back and do him.
Is this
The rest
the
of the family.
sole purpose of Mr. Smith's testimony, or you have
What
other
if?
things to talk with him about?
What if, follow me here, what if
He's on
he
the
didn't
witness
do it?
list. I didn't say necessarily that we're
What
calling
if he
him.
was
What
told
I'm
by
trying to do
some drug
again is to
whomevers, we'll call them
limit
fans
the
or whatever,
presentation to
runners,
just what's
they said, hey,
relevant to this
you
particular
pick
trial. that
one or
we
the
have here
other,
today.
either Maggie or Paul gets it,
And so I would have
We're
it.
talking
or they both get it, and he wouldn't do it. He's like, I
discussing
can't do it,
now
so they killed them both. Or he
motion.
picked Paul because Paul was looking at
excluding
getting
testimony
these
of
charges already,
user witness to
and his
talk
life was
about
already kind of shot and
what
forfeit,
you're arguing.
and
Have
that would
a
have
law
played the
enforcement
financial
witness
aspect
come
of
in
it
and
for
testify
him
to the
having to,
circumstances of
pay
that
out of
statement.
pocket on all
And
this.
again, I'm trying to
So
limit it to what's very
he picked
focused
Paul, and then they
to
were like,
what's relevant to this
we're gonna
trial,
kill
and that
Maggie
is the
anyway.
intended effect that he
Can't
had
leave a
and
witness.
its reaction to the confrontation and
I
the
mean,
symmetry between June 7th
like I
and
said,
September 4th.
Do you have anything in addition to what you?
they're just chatting about this, but I'm going to say this thing. And like I said, when I pulled up that Google on drug trafficking, prosecution has done such a phenomenal job at this point of confusing the jurors. You could almost pick any theory you want, and it would be just as plausible as whatever the case is that they're trying to represent. Because at this point, it's been nothing other than forensic accounting and things that have zero sway in anything, right? There's nothing in this that I feel personally, this is me. Now, granted, I'm not an attorney, I'm not litigating, but I don't feel that as of this point, we've seen anything from the prosecution that has told us that that's the smoking gun. That's it. That's the one, of course. I mean, he's lied about his whereabouts, but as far as putting his finger on a trigger, we haven't seen that yet. And honestly, that's a big deal. That's a big deal because I'm not saying he's not guilty of being culpable for the murders or of being involved in some way. Maybe an accessory after the fact, maybe whatever it might be. But I do feel that there is a potential for there to be other gunmen involved, which is the erratic firing pattern for the wounds on Maggie and Paul, the severity of the wounds. When he was interrogated and he said, "Oh, I did him so bad, or did him so wrong," or did he say they did him so wrong? Either way, I feel he was there when it happened. 100%, I feel he was there when it happened, and he knew it was going to happen, and he had a choice to make, either one of them or both of them, possibly. And then Buster was put on the balance too. Maybe his mom as well. They're like, "Hey, man, here's where it's at. You can pick somebody, or we're going to take out the rest of your lifeline. We're going to kill your entire legacy. Like every Murdaugh's dead, and that's how it's going to be. Or you keep your oldest son, you keep your, you keep your name. And then if you think about it like this too, if it is involving a gang, like a street gang, the Bloods, for instance, is one that they're talking about. The last thing that Alex Murdaugh wants to have is that jacket put on him when he goes to prison, because all they have to do is make that call, and he's going to have a tortured existence in lockup. I mean, he might as well be a pedophile or a rapist, because the gangs run the prison on the inside. You side up, you pick a group, and that's who you're with. And I'm sorry, but if they put a mark on him, that's it, dude. He's cooked. And so his options were either find a way to get off this case without getting us indicted. That's on you, but our name better not come up or everyone else is dead. But here, follow this. And if this happens, I predicted this, some Nostradamus stuff. If in some way another group gets involved in the case and gets impeached not impeached, but indicted for their involvement with the murders, keep an eye on the family. And if someone doesn't have a mysterious incident or accident where someone else dies close to the Murdaugh family, just saying. Maybe the safest place for Buster is sitting in the courtroom, because he's got, he's fully surrounded there by police, and, maybe he's escorted to and escorted from, he shows up, maybe in a convoy type thing. I don't know. I'm just saying, guys, anything you come up with right now is just as plausible as anything I feel like the prosecution has come up with to try to make this a beyond a reasonable doubt situation, because nothing has shown me, and I say this as I'm sitting here, you guys, I walked into this when I'm sure most of you did too. He's guilty. Yeah, he's guilty. Of course he did it. Yeah, I mean, come on. Of course he did it. Look at the guy. Look what he's done. Look at what his crimes. Look, the guy's a world-class piece of shit. He did it. They got to prove otherwise. Well, we know that's not the way the courts are supposed to work. I think we all know that that's kind of the way that we think. You know what I mean? There's not and now I'm at a point where I'm like, well, holy, what if? I mean, what if? Just saying. What? He's right off that intercoastal, what'd you call it, waterways right there. Coming in off the Atlantic, the ocean is right there. Coming in, there's tons of drugs that come in that area, make their way inland. And like they said, this gang was running drugs and guns between Miami and New York, up and down the highways, or the freeway, running up and down that arterial feed on the East Coast. Stands to reason that when you got that much money and you're pushing that much, I mean, the one thing that I did see that I think was also kind of a, when we pull up that drug trafficking, was that there was 2 indictments. South Carolina men involved with the blood gang, the Bloods, these cowboys, right? The Walterboro Cowboy Gang is what they're known. Spencer Anwan Roberts and Jerry K. Rivers allegedly have ties to the Bloods affiliated Walterboro Cowboys gang. All right. So in this, the things that are said, let me see. Spencer Anwan Roberts and Jerry Rivers were slapped with obstruction of justice, money laundering, computer crimes, and fraudulently obtaining signature-related charges on August 19th. The same day, Murdaugh also faced more indictments from the state grand jury in Colleton County. The indictments accuse the men of carrying out other crimes involving narcotics, dangerous drugs, or controlled substances, and such crime being of a multi-county nature and having transpired and having significance in more than one county in the state, and such conduct having not been authorized by law. Okay, they're running drugs. Okay, now bring in Fast Eddie, right? The co-conspirator, Curtis Fast Eddie Smith, okay? Now, now Murdaugh, who's pled not guilty to the 21 murders of wife Maggie and son Paul, was indicted for the first time in connection to an alleged drug trafficking ring 2.5 months ago, along with accused co-conspirator Curtis Fast Eddie Smith. This story came out in September of last year. So they're saying in August of last year or July of last year, these things came out, right? And where are we at over here? They're talking about the murder for hot flyer, the murder, suicide for hire plot that was botched. The June's indictment over an alleged oxycodone and meth trafficking conspiracy says Murdaugh issued approximately 437 checks totaling approximately $2.4 million to Smith, Fast Eddie, from October 7th, 2013 to February 28th, 2021. He has like 90 other additional charges, but amongst that, Rivers is accused of taking a cell phone belonging to another individual who had been arrested and interfering with law enforcement carrying out a search warrant. The New York Post reported that Roberts and Rivers have either close friends or cousins on Walterboro Cowboys, the notorious street gang. And then, as quoted, Alex Murdaugh runs half the drugs in this county. One of those individuals reported to the New York Post. I mean, if we're looking for anything here, drugs, I think, played a big part of this. You know what I mean? Drugs and money, right? I mean, the two go hand in hand. And when it comes down to trying to cover your tracks, there it is, you know? So we're going to look more into it tomorrow. We got Fast Eddie, or Cousin Eddie, coming up to the stand. Something to look forward to. Do me a favor, for everyone that's in here right now, share the stream. I say it and I say it again. What I mean is pick a group, pick your friend base, and just share the stream out. Highlight everybody, highlight all the groups you hang out and talk to. Pick a group for me. If you could do that, that's a personal ask. If you're able to do anything to help grow our network and promote and support our community here, we need to get as much, traffic as possible. And that comes by breaking the algorithm. And the best way we can do that is by sharing the stream and getting it out to as many people as possible. Even if it just touches them and comes back, there's going to be follow-up. So if you would please share the stream going into tomorrow, you guys. Cousin Eddie was out on bond originally, but put back in jail for violating his house arrest 26 times in 2 weeks. Thank you, Jessica. And I look forward to reaching out to you tomorrow. And hopefully we'll have some one-on-one. You can give us some more insight into the case. You guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. Sleep in a little bit tomorrow for you guys on the West Coast. We're going to be starting at 10:30 Eastern Standard. That'll be 9:30 Central. And of course, that'll be still a little early for you West Coasters at 7:30. But definitely nice to be able to go out and enjoy your Valentine's Day night. Find someone you like or can tolerate. Tell them you love them. Give them a hug, high five. Maybe some chocolate edible something or others. I don't know. I was thinking back in the day they used to sell edible underwear at 7-Eleven, the chocolate ones, little rose. Oh, how times is changing. But barring 7-Eleven notions of sentiment and personal fealty, you guys have a great time. I love you all for being here, and I appreciate all your support and continued inclusion in this community. You guys are great. Thank you for watching CJ TV. I am, as always, your humble host, CJ. And I appreciate you being here with us today. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. You guys have an amazing night and happy Valentine's Day.